The air didn't just smell different, it tasted wrong. When the airplane doors unsealed, I expected fresh air. Instead, a rush of damp, metallic sludge hit the back of my throat. It tasted like burnt rubber and old rain on cold pavement. I stepped off the metal stairs onto the tarmac, and the cold slapped me across the face. It wasn't the crisp, cool morning air of the savannah before the sun burned the mist away. This was an aggressive, wet cold that seeped instantly through the thin silk of the white dress I'd married him in. It clawed at my bones. I shivered violently, my teeth clamping together so hard my jaw ached. A heavy weight settled onto my shoulders. Grayson's suit jacket. It smelled like him, cedar, musk, and the underlying metallic tang of suppressed violence. It was warm from his body, but even enveloped in his scent, I felt alien. "Keep your head down, eyes forward," Grayson murmured against my ear. His voice was a low rumble, stripped of any tenderness he'd shown in the hotel room back home. Back home. The words twisted like a knife in my gut. I wasn't in the village anymore. I was standing on gray concrete under a sky that looked like bruised iron, surrounded by the deafening scream of jet engines. I looked up at him. His gray eyes were scanning the perimeter, restless and predatory. The man who had held my hand on the plane, stroking my knuckles while I stared out the window in terrified silence, was gone. This was the Alpha. This was the exile returning to a war zone. The mate brand on my neck throbbed in time with his elevated heart rate. His tension bled into me through the invisible bond, a high-wire frequency of anxiety and aggression that made my own skin crawl. "Move," he said, guiding me toward a black vehicle idling on the tarmac. It looked like a hearse. Lucien was already at the rear door, holding it open. His pale eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no welcome in them. Only grim assessment. I was cargo. Precious cargo, perhaps, but cargo that was complicating their tactical situation. I slid into the leather interior. It smelled sterile, like new chemicals. Grayson slid in beside me, taking up so much space, his thigh hard as granite against mine. He didn't take my hand. His hands were resting on his knees, fingers twitching slightly, ready to shift, ready to kill. The drive was an hour of suffocating silence. I watched the world blur past the tinted windows. The sprawling, chaotic energy of the city gave way to gray highways, then to narrow, winding roads hedged in by dark, wet greenery that looked nothing like the sun-drenched bush I knew. Everything here was damp, shadowed, and tight. I felt like the landscape itself was closing in on me. I spun the heavy gold wedding band around my finger over and over, a nervous tick. I was Mrs. Grayson Anderson. I was a mate in enemy territory. I was a farmer's daughter in a silk dress, shivering in a stranger's jacket. I felt sick with the whiplash of it all. "We're here," Lucien announced from the front. I leaned forward, expecting a house, maybe a stone cottage like in the old books Mama used to read. What I saw made my breath hitch. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress made of glass and black steel, jutting out of a rocky hillside like a jagged tooth. It looked cold, uninhabitable, and obscenely expensive. There were no welcoming lights, just a sullen, hulking silhouette against the darkening gray sky. "It's secure," Grayson said, sensing my hesitation. "Reinforced steel framing, ballistic glass, subterranean perimeter sensors. It's the safest place for us right now." Safest. It looked like a high-tech prison. Lucien pulled up to the front. The gravel crunching under the tires sounded impossibly loud in the stillness of the countryside. We got out. The silence here was different than the village night. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. The wind whipped my braided hair around my face, stinging my eyes. Grayson led me to the massive front door. There was no key. He placed his palm flat against a black panel next to the frame. A beam of red light scanned his hand. There was a sharp click, and the heavy door swung open soundlessly. I stepped inside, and the sensory overload was immediate. It was freezing. The air inside was filtered, devoid of any natural smell. We were standing in a cavernous foyer with polished concrete floors that reflected the gray light from outside. "Lights!" Grayson barked into the darkness. Suddenly, the entire space was flooded with a harsh, clinical white light hidden in the ceiling recesses. I flinched, stumbling back a step, throwing a hand up to shield my eyes. Grayson didn't notice my panic. He was already moving deeper into the house, shedding his tie, rolling up his sleeves to reveal thick forearms corded with muscle. "Lucian, sweep the east wing, check the server room, make sure Clara hasn't had her rats bypass the firewall," Grayson ordered, his voice echoing off the hard surfaces. "I'll take the perimeter sensors." He stopped, turning to look at me standing by the door, clutching his jacket like a lifeline. For a second, the alpha mask slipped, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Zuri, the kitchen is through that archway. There should be supplies. Get some water, try to eat something. I need an hour to secure the grounds." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and disappeared down a long, glass-walled corridor. I was alone. I walked slowly toward the archway he'd pointed to. My heels clicked sharply on the concrete floor, the sound lonely and small in the vast space. I entered the kitchen. I stopped dead. Where was the stove? Where were the pots? Where was the fire? It was a vast expanse of white marble countertops and black handleless cabinets that sat flush against the walls. There were no burners, just a sleek, black sheet of glass set into the island. The faucet over the metal sink looked like a piece of modern art, thin and curved chrome. I was parched. My throat felt like it was coated in dust from the flight. I just wanted a cup of water. I approached the sink tentatively. I reached for the chrome faucet, looking for a knob or a lever to turn. There was nothing. I touched the metal. Nothing. I gripped it, trying to twist it. It didn't move. Frustration bubbled up, hot and stinging behind my eye and my eyes. I had faced down a rogue werewolf. I had defied my father. I had married an exiled alpha, and now I was going to die of thirst because I was too stupid to operate a British faucet. I jerked my hand back in anger. As I did, my movement triggered a sensor I hadn't seen. Water blasted out of the faucet with jet engine force, splashing all over the front of my silk dress. I jumped back with a cry, slipping on the wet concrete floor. I barely caught myself on the edge of the marble island. I stood there, dripping wet in the freezing, silent house, staring at the water running into the sleek metal drain. A sob tore at my throat, but I choked it back down. No. I looked at my reflection in the black oven door opposite me. The white dress was stained dark with water across the stomach. My eyes were wide and terrified. I looked like exactly what someone would call a mud hut distraction, a primitive girl lost in the future. The bond in my neck pulsed hot. Grayson was nearby, his aggression spiking at something he found outside. He needed me strong, he didn't need a liability. I straightened my spine until it hurt. I wiped the water from my face with a trembling hand. I forced the terror down into the pit of my stomach and locked it away. I was not a victim. I was the Alpha's wife, and I would figure out this cold, impossible world if it killed me. I stared down the futuristic faucet until I found the sensor eye. I waved my hand calmly in front of it. The water turned off. Step 1. The water stain on my dress had dried into a stiff, crinkled patch against my stomach, a cold reminder of my incompetence. I wandered out of the kitchen, moving deeper into the glass mausoleum Grayson called a safe house. I found a living area that looked like a showroom for uncomfortable furniture. Low, angular couches, upholstered in gray wool that scratched my bare arms, sat arranged around a fireplace that held no wood, just a bed of black glass stones. I tapped a panel on the wall, and flames erupted from the stones instantly, too perfectly orange, too silent. Another trick. I stood before the artificial fire, hugging my arms, trying to chase the chill from my bones. This country felt like it was trying to freeze the blood in my veins. The sound of heavy boots on concrete echoed down the hall, followed by the lower rumble of voices. Grayson was back, and he wasn't alone. He swept into the room, the energy shift instantaneous. He was still in war mode, his tie gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone to reveal the thick column of his throat and the pulse hammering there. The bond between us hummed. He was satisfied. The perimeter was secure. Trailing behind him were 3 people. They stopped at the threshold, an instinctive hesitation before entering the Alpha's personal space. I turned my back to the fake fire. I felt small in my wrinkled silk dress, barefoot on the cold floor, an intruder in their world. "Zuri," Grayson said, his voice clipping along with military precision. "These are the remnants, the few who didn't sell their loyalty for Clara's silver." He gestured to a severe-looking woman in her late 50s. She wore practical gray cargo pants and a thick wool sweater. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it pulled at the skin around her eyes. She smelled faintly of bleach and old anger. "Martha. She manages the logistics of the safe house." Martha didn't bow. She gave a jerk of her chin that barely qualified as an acknowledgement. Her pale eyes swept over me, assessing the dried water stain, the bare feet, the tremor I couldn't quite suppress. I saw the dismissal in her gaze. Human, weak, useless. "And the guard detail," Grayson continued, motioning to 2 hulking men behind her. One was thick-set with a shaved head. The other, younger, with hair the color of dirty straw, was staring at me with open, hostile curiosity. Elias and Cole. The 2 men gave grunt-like nods. The air in the room thickened with their scent, musk, damp earth, and an underlying metallic tang that I was learning meant shifter. It was overwhelming to my human senses, a physical pressure against my skin. "Martha, she needs clothes that are suitable for this climate, and food, something substantial," Grayson ordered, moving toward a massive screen embedded in the far wall. Martha stepped further into the room. She didn't look at me. She looked at Grayson's back. "Does it eat meat, Alpha? Or do I need to source rabbit food?" "It." The word hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Grayson froze. His shoulders bunched beneath his shirt. A low growl started deep in his chest, a vibration that rattled through the floorboards and straight into my bones. "Martha," he warned, his voice a dangerous sub-zero drop. "It's fine," I said. My voice was quieter than theirs, but it cut through the tension. I stepped away from the fire. I walked until I was standing directly in front of the older woman. She was taller than me, thicker, built like a farm generator. I had to tilt my head back slightly and meet her eyes. "My name is Zuri," I said, keeping my tone level, stripping it of any emotion. "Not it, not she. Zuri. And yes, I eat meat. I grew up slaughtering my own goats. I suspect I know more about where meat comes from than you do, buying it wrapped in plastic." Martha blinked, taken aback. Her scent spiked with surprise. Behind her, the younger guard, Elias, let out a short, derisive snort. It was an ugly sound, wet and dismissive. I shifted my gaze to him. He was leaning against the door frame, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his thick lips. "Something funny?" I asked. Elias looked me up and down again, slow and insulting. "Just thinking it's a hell of a time to be housebreaking a new pet, Alpha. With Clara breathing down our necks, didn't think we had time for baggage." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Grayson spun around from the wall screen. His eyes had bled into pure wolfish gold. The air crackled with his imminent violence. He took a step toward Ellis, his hands curling into claws at his sides. "Grayson, stop." My voice stopped him. He looked at me, his chest heaving, the killing urge fighting with his human reason. I didn't look away from Elias. I didn't raise my voice. I tapped into the cold, hard knot that had formed in my stomach when I decided to get on that plane. The village spine. "You think I'm baggage," I stated, walking slowly toward the guard until I was within arm's reach. He smelled offensive, sweat and arrogant aggression. "You see a human girl in a dirty dress and you think I am a weight to be carried." I held his gaze. He was a predator, used to things cowering before him. I refused to cower. "Let me be very clear so you don't make this mistake again," I said softly, letting the words drop like stones into deep water. "I am not here because I am strong like you. I am not here because I have claws or teeth." I raised my left hand, the heavy gold wedding band catching the harsh overhead light. "I am here because your Alpha chose me. I am the anchor that keeps his human half sane enough to lead you without tearing your throats out." Elias's smirk faltered, his scent soured with uncertainty. "My value is absolute because I am his wife," I hissed, stepping closer, invading his personal space until he actually shifted his weight back. "Your value is as a soldier. Soldiers are replaceable, especially the stupid ones." I held his eyes for 3 more seconds, letting the silence stretch until he was the first one to look away, dropping his gaze to the floor. Submission. I turned my back on him and looked at Martha, whose pale eyes were now wide with reevaluation. "I'll take that steak now. Rare." Across the room, Grayson watched me. The golden fury in his eyes receded, replaced by a smoldering, dark gray heat. The bond between us flared, hot and heavy. It wasn't just lust, it was a fierce, primal pride that washed over me, warming me better than the fake fire ever could. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. "My Luna." I ate the steak Martha brought me like an animal starved. It was rare, bloody in the middle, and I cut it into savage chunks, swallowing them almost whole. The adrenaline crash from confronting Elias had left me shaking, a hollow pit in my stomach that needed filling. Grayson watched me eat from across the sterile steel island in the kitchen. He didn't speak. He just tracked every movement of my fork to my mouth, his gray eyes darkening with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. The air between us vibrated. The bond, that invisible, terrifying tether that connected us, was pulling taut, humming with a frequency that made my skin prickle. When I dropped the fork onto the empty porcelain plate, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. "Done?" Grayson's voice was a low murmur, rough like gravel tumbling in a mixer. I nodded, wiping blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. He stood up. "Come." He didn't offer his arm. He turned and walked toward a staircase that seemed to float against a wall of black glass. I followed him, my bare feet silent on the cold treads. Upstairs, down another long corridor that felt like the hallway of a very expensive hospital. He opened double doors at the end of the hall and stepped aside for me to enter. The master's suite. It was huge, dominated by a bed larger than my entire hut back in the village. One wall was entirely glass, looking out into the pitch-black wet night of the English countryside. The room was freezing, and it smelled only of him. Cedar, rain, and the sharp coppery tang of an alpha on edge. Grayson closed the doors behind us, the click of the locks and a jolt straight down my spine. We were alone, truly alone for the first time since we fled Africa. The noise of the flight, the threat of Clara, the disrespect of the guards, it all vanished, leaving only the two of us in this cold, luxurious cage. I stood in the middle of the room, shivering in my ruined wedding dress. The silk was stiff with dried water and sweat clinging to my exhausted body. I felt filthy. I felt raw. Grayson walked toward me. He didn't stop at a polite distance. He crowded into my space, radiating heat like a furnace. He towered over me, big and terrifying, the civilized suit he wore doing nothing to hide the apex predator beneath. He reached out, his large, calloused hands framing my face. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, rough against my skin. He stared into my eyes, searching, assessing. "You did well downstairs," he said, his voice thick. "My Luna." The title sent a shiver through me that wasn't from the cold. It was a weight, a responsibility, a brand. "They needed to know," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "They do now." His gaze dropped to my mouth, then lower, to the pulse, frantic in my throat, right where his mark was scarred into my skin. The scar throbbed hot, answering his proximity. The air in the room thickened, becoming hard to breathe. The bond screamed. It wasn't a polite request for intimacy. It was a demanding roar in my blood. We had survived. We were here. And the beast inside him needed to solidify that survival in the most primal way possible. "Take it off, Zuri." It wasn't a request. My hand shook as I reached for the small zipper at the small of my back. I couldn't get purchase on it. I was too cold, too nervous. Grayson made a growling sound low in his throat, impatience mixed with desperate need. He batted my hands away. "Let me." He spun me around. I felt his hot breath on the nape of my neck, sending gooseflesh ripping down my arms. He didn't bother with the zipper. He grabbed the delicate silk of the dress at the shoulder seams and ripped downwards. The fabric screamed as it gave way. The dress pooled at my feet in a ruin of white silk. I stood before him in just my thin lace underwear, the cold air biting my skin. But I didn't feel cold anymore. I was burning up from the inside out. He spun me back to face him. His eyes were pure gold now, the wolf fully present, staring out from his human face. He devoured me with his eyes, taking in the curves of my body, the dark skin shivering under his gaze. He didn't say anything beautiful. There were no promises of eternal love. This wasn't romance. This was necessity. He tore at his own clothes, buttons flying across the polished wood floor. He shed the suit like a restrictive skin, revealing the expanse of his chest, thick with muscle and dusted with dark hair scarred from a lifetime of fighting. When he was naked, the sheer size of him took my breath away. He was magnificent and terrifying, a weapon forged in flesh. He reached for me, his hands rough and urgent. He lifted me off my feet as if I weighed nothing, wrapping my legs around his waist. I gasped at the sudden contact, the searing heat of his skin against mine. He carried me to the massive bed and threw me onto the mattress. It wasn't gentle. I bounced against the firm surface, sprawling on the Egyptian cotton sheets that felt like ice against my back. Before I could catch my breath, he was crawling over me, a dark shadow blocking out the room. He settled between my legs, his weight a crushing, welcome pressure. He didn't wait. He couldn't wait. I could feel the tremors running through his massive frame, the battle he was waging to keep the wolf from taking over completely. He kissed me hard. It was a bruising claim of a kiss, teeth clashing, tongues warring. He tasted like fury and desperation. I tasted him back, meeting his aggression with my own. I needed this too. I needed to feel something other than fear and cold. I needed to know that the monster who protected me was mine. He broke the kiss, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, rubbing his cheek against the scar he'd left there. He groaned, a guttural sound against my skin. "Mine," he growled against my pulse. "You are mine in this world and the next. Let them try to take you." He reached down between our bodies, guiding himself. I arched my hips to meet him, desperate to close the distance, to fill the emptiness that had been gnawing at me since we landed. He thrust into me in one powerful, seamless motion. I cried out, a sharp intake of breath that was half pain, half overwhelming relief. He was so big, stretching me, filling me completely. It felt impossibly deep, like he was touching the very core of me. He froze for a second, letting me adjust to his size, his muscles rigid under my hands as I clawed at his shoulders. Then he began to move. It was raw, it was fast, it was violent in its intensity. There was no finesse, just a desperate, rhythmic pounding that shook the heavy bed frame. I met him thrust for thrust. I wrapped my legs tighter around his hips, pulling him deeper. I dragged my nails down his back, feeling the thick ridges of old scars under my fingertips. I wanted to leave new marks. I wanted him to know I was there, that I wasn't breakable. Every thrust sent a jolt of electricity along the mate bond, a feedback loop of pleasure and possessive need that blurred the lines between where I ended and he began. His breathing was ragged, harsh in my ear. He was snarling softly with every push, his control fraying. "Look at me, Zuri," he commanded, his voice strained. I opened my eyes. His golden gaze bore into mine, intense and unblinking. "You are my wife," he gritted out, slamming into me harder. "My mate, my queen." The words were a vow, hammered into me with every stroke. The tension coiled tight in my belly, hot and heavy. I threw my head back, a guttural cry tearing from my throat as the pleasure crested, crashing over me in a violent wave that made my vision white out. Feeling my release triggered his own. He roared my name, his body bowing taut, bearing himself to the hilt inside me one last time. I felt the hot pulse of his seed deep inside me, a physical claiming that matched the spiritual one. He collapsed on top of me, crushing me into the mattress, his heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We lay there in the dark, sweating, panting, tangled in the ruined sheets. The silence of the big house rushed back in, but it didn't feel empty anymore. The bond between us settled into a steady, deep thrum, a gold chain forging us together. I was still terrified of this cold country. I still hated the metal house. But as Grayson's heavy weight pressed me down, grounding me, I knew one thing for certain. I was an Alpha's mate, and the war had just begun. When I woke up, the bed was cold beside me. I reached out, my hand brushing across acres of freezing, high thread count Egyptian cotton. Empty. The dent where Grayson's massive frame had rested was already cool to the touch. For a moment, lying in the gray light filtering through the massive window, I didn't know where I was. The smell was wrong. No wood smoke, no sun-baked earth, no rich scent of roasting coffee beans from my mother's kitchen. Just sterile air filtration and the faint, lingering musk of sex. Memory crashed down on me. The flight, the metal fortress, the way Grayson had torn that dress off me. I sat up and immediately gasped. My body felt wrecked. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from between my legs, a physical reminder of the sheer size of him and the desperate violence of our coupling. My inner thighs were tender, and when I looked down at my breasts, I saw the faint purple bruises where his fingers had dug in, claiming me. I touched the mark on my neck. The scar tissue was raised, hot against my cool skin. The bond hummed low in my mind, a steady background static that told me he was alive, awake, and somewhere in this concrete tomb. But the intense, searing heat of last night was damped down, replaced by a cold wall of focus. He was working. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was freezing. I found the shredded remains of my wedding dress kicked into a corner, a heap of ruined white silk that looked like a dead dove. I left it there. I needed to wash. I felt sticky with dried sweat and his dried seed crusting on my thighs. I found the bathroom through a hidden door in the wall. It was like the kitchen, all polished slate and chrome, with fixtures I didn't understand. The shower was a glass cube big enough for 4 people. There were no knobs, just a digital panel glowing blue on the wall. I stared at it, tears of sheer frustration prickling behind my eyes. I had faced down a rogue wolf, but I was about to be defeated by a British shower. I jabbed a finger at a picture of a water droplet. Jets of water fired from the ceiling and 3 walls simultaneously, hitting me with freezing cold spray. I yelped, dancing backward, slipping on the wet slate. I slapped the panel wildly until the water cut off. I stood shivering, naked and humiliated in the silence. Primitive girl. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I wouldn't let this house beat me. I tried again, slower, finding a temperature setting. Soon steam began to fill the glass cube. I stepped under the scalding spray, scrubbing my skin raw, trying to wash away the feeling of being alien in my own body. When I got out, I found a stack of clothes folded with military precision on a granite bench. They weren't mine. No vibrant colors, no patterned wraps, gray sweatpants made of thick fleece, and an oversized black hoodie that smelled faintly of Grayson. I put them on. They swallowed my frame, but the warmth was welcome. I looked in the mirror, with my hair unraveling from its braids and dark circles under my eyes, wrapped in drab gray. I didn't recognize myself. I looked like a refugee. Which, I suppose, I was. I left the bedroom, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. The hallway was silent. I followed the faint scent of coffee, real coffee, down toward the kitchen area. Martha was there, wiping down the already spotless stainless steel island. She didn't look up when I entered. "There is coffee in the pot," she said to the counter. "And oatmeal on the stove. The Alpha said you need carbohydrates." "Thank you, Martha," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I poured a mug of black coffee. It was bitter, strong enough to strip paint, just how I needed it. "Where is he?" I asked. Martha finally looked at me. Her pale eyes swept over the oversized hoodie, noting the way I moved stiffly because of the soreness between my legs. A flicker of something, disdain, pity, crossed her face. "War room, sub-level 1. He is not to be disturbed." "I'm his wife," I said, the words tasting strange on my tongue. "I don't disturb him. I join him." Martha let out a short, dry laugh. "This isn't a village council meeting, girl. This is tactical. You just be in the way." The heat flared in my chest again. The village spine. "We'll see." I walked past her, toward the stairs I'd seen Lucien take yesterday that led downward. I descended into the belly of the house. The air got colder as I went down, smelling of damp concrete and ozone. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. Voices drifted out, sharp, angry, fast-paced. I pushed the door open. The room was bathed in the blue glow of massive wall screens displaying maps, scrolling lines of code, and grainy surveillance footage. Grayson stood in the center of it all, leaning over a digital tabletop map. Lucien was beside him, typing furiously on a laptop. Elias stood by the door, arms crossed, looking bored until he saw me. Grayson's head snapped up as I entered. His eyes were hard, the gray shards of ice. For a split second, I saw annoyance that his orders had been disobeyed. Then the bond flared, a quick, hot pulse of recognition and possession. His gaze dropped down my body, noting the baggy clothes, then back up to my face. "Zuri," I said I needed time. "And I need to know what my life is now," I said, walking further into the room. The concrete floor here was raw, unpolished. "I'm not going to sit upstairs eating oatmeal while you decide my fate." Lucien stopped typing. Elias shifted his weight. They were waiting for the Alpha to put the disobedient maid in her place. Grayson straightened up to his full height. The tension in the room skyrocketed. He held my gaze for a long, agonizing moment, Then he huffed a breath out through his nose. A concession. "Come here," he commanded, pointing to the spot beside him at the table. I walked over, aware of Elias's eyes on me. I stood next to Grayson. He didn't touch me, but his heat radiated against my side, a solid wall of comfort in the freezing room. He gestured to the glowing map on the table. It showed a sprawling estate somewhere green. Red icons were swarming over it. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "My home," Grayson growled, the sound vibrating deep in his chest. "My actual home, the Packlands." He tapped the glass surface hard. "Clara isn't just hunting us, Zuri. She's erasing me. Since dawn, her new enforcers have been systematically burning down every structure on Wormwood land that has my family crest on it. The lodge, the archives, everything." I stared at the red dots on the screen, realizing they represented fire and destruction. "She wants to make it so I never existed," he said. His voice devoid of inflection, cold as death. "She's salting the earth." He looked at me then, and the raw, naked fury in his eyes made my brains and breath catch. It wasn't the hot rage of last night. This was something colder, something eternal. "Welcome to the dynasty, baby," he whispered darkly. "We have nothing left but this bunker and the blood in our veins." The image of the burning lands burned behind my eyelids long after I left the subterranean war room. Grayson had remained below, his voice a low rumble as he issued orders to ghosts trying to salvage assets that were already ash. Upstairs, the silence of the bunker pressed in on me. It was a tomb of glass and steel, hermetically sealed against the world. I felt suffocated by the recycled air, by the drab gray clothes that weren't mine, by the sheer uselessness of my existence here. I needed to do something. My hands, calloused from years of farming and grinding millet, itched for work. In the village, when death visited or disaster struck, the women didn't sit in sterile rooms staring at screens. We gathered, we cooked, we fed the living so they had strength to mourn the dead. I marched toward the kitchen. This was a battlefield I understood. Martha was there again, like a severe gray sentinel guarding the appliances. She was pulling plastic trays out of a massive, humming refrigerator, things labeled chicken tikka masala and beef lasagna in neat printed fonts. Frozen meals for frozen people. "Put those back," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the snap of dry wood breaking. Martha paused, holding a frosty tray. She turned slowly, her eyebrows raised in exaggerated patience. "Excuse me." I said, "Put them back. We are not eating plastic food tonight." I walked past her to the refrigerator. It was cavernous, filled mostly with bottled water, energy drinks, and the despised ready meals. But in the bottom drawers, I found raw ingredients. Why they had them if they never used them was a mystery of Western excess. I pulled out vacuum-sealed chicken breasts, a bag of onions, garlic, and, miraculously, a small container of fresh red chili peppers. Martha slammed the freezer door shut. "Those are emergency rations, girl. The Alpha and his men need calculated nutrition, not whatever hedge witch concoction you plan to throw together." I dropped the ingredients onto the stainless steel island with a loud thud. "They need blood and fire," I retorted, facing her down. "They are preparing for war, Martha. You don't feed warriors bland frozen paste. You feed them something that makes them remember what they are fighting to protect." "I have managed this household for 5 years," Martha hissed, stepping closer, her wolf scent spiking with irritation. "I know what they need. You are a guest here, Zuri. A temporary complication. Do not presume to tell me my job." I grabbed a heavy chef's knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. The weight of it in my hand was grounding. Martha flinched, just slightly. "I am not a guest," I said, my voice low and steady, echoing the tone Grayson used when he wanted absolute obedience. I tapped the knife flat against the cutting board. I am his wife. That means this is my kitchen. If you want to be useful, find me ginger. If not, get out of my way." The swing door pushed open. Grayson stood there. He looked exhausted, the lines around his gray eyes deeper than before. The scent of burnt ozone and stress clung to him. He looked from Martha's outraged face to me, standing behind the island with the knife in my hand. "Problem?" His voice was gravel. "She is interfering with protocol, Alpha," Martha said immediately, pointing a finger at me, "disrupting the meal schedule with unnecessary demands." Grayson looked at me. His eyes dropped to the knife, then up to the fierce set of my jaw. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, softening the harsh planes of his face. The bond thrummed with a sudden, warm approval. Pride. "Martha?" Grayson said, his voice dropping into that command register that brooked no argument. "Zuri is my mate. If she wants to burn the kitchen down, you will hand her the matches. Do you understand?" Martha paled. Her jaw worked silently for a moment before she dipped her head in a jerky nod of submission. "Yes, Alpha." "Good. Now find her the ginger." He turned and walked out without another word. Martha moved stiffly, locating a knob of a ginger root in a forgotten corner of the fridge and placing it silently on the counter before retreating from the room. Alone, I began to work. I didn't know how to use the 18 different settings on the induction stove, so I turned the biggest burner to maximum heat. I chopped the onions violently, letting the tears come, weeping for the burning village on the screen, for Kofi, for the life I'd lost. The hot oil hissed when I threw the aromatics in. The smell hit the air. Garlic, ginger, searing, chilly heat. It smelled like life. It smelled like home. I seared the chicken, basting it in spices until the sterile kitchen smelled like an African street market. An hour later, I heard the heavy tread of boots. Grayson entered the kitchen again. He stopped in the doorway, inhaling deeply. The tension in his shoulders seemed to drop by an inch. He walked over to the island where I had set a bowl for him. Steam curled off the spicy chicken stew. He didn't sit. He stood leaning against the counter, watching me with intense predatory focus as I wiped my hands on a towel. "You fought for your territory," he murmured, his eyes gleaming golden in the harsh kitchen light. "Someone had to cook something edible," I replied, sliding the bowl toward him. He picked up the fork and took a bite. He chewed slowly, his eyes slipping closed as the heat and spice hit his tongue. He let out a low groan that vibrated through the counter and straight into my stomach. "Gods," he breathed, opening his eyes. They were dark with hunger now, and not just for food. That tastes like heat. He ate ravenously then, scraping the bowl clean. When he was finished, he set the bowl down and reached across the island, snagging my wrist. His grip was iron hard, pulling me until my hip bumped against the steel counter. He brought my hand to his mouth, kissing the center of my palm. His tongue traced the rough skin, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight down to my core. "You feed me well, wife," he growled against my skin, the vibration running up my arm. The bond flared hot between us, a promise of another kind of hunger, waiting to be sated. "Keep your fire, Zuri. We're going to need it." 2 weeks in the concrete bunker had taught me that English werewolf society was a lot like the woven, intricate beadwork of my village. Complicated, rigid, and if you pulled the wrong thread, the whole thing unraveled. My days had fallen into a suffocating routine. While Grayson spent hours in the subterranean war room planning counterstrikes against Clara's financial stranglehold, I was subjected to Luna training by Martha. "Posture, Zuri," Martha chided, tapping my spine with a rolled-up tablet. We were in the sterile living area, which she treated like a finishing school classroom. Aluna does not slouch like a farmer carrying yams. She glides. She is an edifice of grace. I straightened my back, fighting the urge to snatch the tablet and feed it to the waste disposal unit. I was wearing stiff, tailored trousers and a silk blouse that felt like a straitjacket. I missed the sun on my bare arms. I missed the feeling of dirt under my fingernails. And when addressed by an allied alpha, Martha continued, her tone lecturing, you speak only when spoken to. You are an accessory to Alpha Grayson's power, not an independent variable. Especially, her eyes dipped to my human skin, given your provenance. My provenance. My origin. The polite way of saying I was a human savage he dragged out of the bush. I am his wife, Martha, I said, keeping my voice level, not his jewelry. In this world, my dear, the distinction is often blurred. Tonight is the first test. Alpha Hemlock is coming. He is old blood. Very traditional. He controls shipping lanes Grayson needs. Do not embarrass us. Hemlock arrived at sundown. The bunker's air filtration system worked overtime to scrub the sudden influx of new wolf scent. Something musky and cloyingly sweet, like rotting flowers hidden under expensive cologne. We met him in the upper conference room, a glass-walled space overlooking the dark, rain-soaked hills. Grayson stood at the head of the polished obsidian table. He was wearing a suit again, tailored impeccably to hide the violence coiled beneath. When I entered it, his eyes tracked me, the bond humming a low, steady note of reassurance. I am here. Martha, Elias, and Lucian were lined up against the wall like statues. Alpha Hemlock was shorter than Grayson, thicker around the middle, with slicked-back silver hair and eyes that looked like cold coins. He didn't bow to Grayson. He offered a stiff nod, the bare minimum of respect between alphas. His eyes landed on me. They didn't travel down my body with lust like the bar patrons back home. They dismissed me entirely. It was the look one gives a piece of cheap furniture in a palace. Grayson, Hemlock said, his voice smooth and oily. A troubled homecoming, I hear. Clara is burning your legacy to the ground, and you are hiding in a hole in the ground. Tactical retreat, Marcus, Grayson replied, his voice clipped. We are here to discuss the northern shipping routes. Of course. Business. Hemlock poured himself a water from the carafe on the table, not waiting to be offered. He took a sip, then gestured vaguely in my direction with the glass. Though I see your judgment is still impaired. I heard rumors you picked up a stray during your exile, but I didn't think you'd actually marry the creature. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second. Grayson didn't move, but the air around him vibrated. A low growl started in his chest, a sound so deep it rattled the water glass Hemlock was holding. The beast was surging forward. Elias and Lucien tensed, hands dropping to sidearms they weren't supposed to need. Martha looked at me, her eyes pleading, "Stay silent, be an accessory." The bond screamed at me to let Grayson handle it, to let him tear this man's throat out for the insult. But I looked at Hemlock, this soft, arrogant man in his expensive suit, sneering at me because I wasn't born with fur. I thought of the women in my village. I thought of Mama Ode facing down a cobra with a broom. I thought of my own hands, stained with the blood of a rogue wolf I'd stabbed to save myself. I did not survive the African bush to be insulted by a man who looked like he'd never chopped his own firewood. I stepped forward before Grayson could launch himself across the table. I placed my hand flat on the cool obsidian surface. The sound was sharp in the tense silence. "A stray," I repeated, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. I didn't glide, as Martha taught. I planted my feet firm on the floor, the stance of a woman ready to hold her ground against a storm. Hemlock looked surprised that the furniture was speaking. "Excuse me?" "You called me a stray, a creature." I held his gaze. My eyes weren't golden, but they were forged in a harsher sun than he had ever known. "Where I come from, we have words for men like you, Alpha Hemlock." Grayson had gone still beside me. The growl stopped. He was watching me, intense curiosity warring with his protective instincts. Men who hide their weakness behind loud words and expensive silks, I continued, letting my village accent thicken slightly, letting the rhythm of my mother tongue bleed into the English. You sit in your high tower, judging the world while others bleed for you. You speak of bloodlines and tradition, but you smell of fear. Hemlock spluttered, his face turning an ugly shade of red. You insolent little Grayson, control your bitch. Grayson smiled. It was a terrifying thing. I don't control her, Marcus, and I suggest you listen. I leaned forward slightly. You think I'm weak because I am human? Because I come from the earth instead of a boardroom? My people hunt lions with wooden spears. We survive droughts that would wither you to dust in a day. I have faced death more times in a week than you have in your entire soft, pampered life. I tapped the table again, harder this time. Grayson did not pick up a stray. He found a partner who knows how to survive when the world is burning. Clara is burning down your precious civilized world, Alpha Hemlock, and when the fire reaches your door, who will you want beside you? Another soft wolf worried about posture? Or someone who knows how to hold a knife? I held his gaze until he was the one to look away. He coughed, adjusting his tie nervously, the smell of his expensive cologne souring with genuine anxiety. Your point is taken, madam, he muttered, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. I stepped back to Grayson's side, resuming the correct posture Martha had taught me. Grayson didn't look at Hemlock. He looked at me. The pride radiating from him through the bond was hot enough to burn. His hand found the small of my back, his large fingers splaying out, branding me through the silk blouse. You were saying about the shipping routes, Marcus? Grayson asked, his voice deceptively mild, though his eyes were still fixed on me, burning with possessive heat. Hemlock was diminished. He rushed through the rest of the meeting, agreeing to terms he likely wouldn't have accepted an hour ago, just to get out of the room. When he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, the tension broke. From the corner of the room, Elias let out a low, impressed whistle. Damn, the Luna has teeth. I turned to Martha. The older woman was staring at me, her severe mouth slightly agape. There was no lecture in her eyes now, only a grudging, stunned respect. Your posture was terrible, Martha sniffed, smoothing her skirt, though her voice lacked its usual bite. But the delivery was adequate. It was the highest praise she was capable of. Grayson turned to me, ignoring them all. He gripped my chin, tilting my face up to his. His golden eyes were blazing. My village queen, he murmured, his thumb tracing my lower lip. Remind me never to piss you off in public. The London skyline glittered 70 stories below us, a sprawling grid of artificial light that made me ache for the oppressive, star-filled darkness of the bush. This gathering was mandatory, a quarterly peacekeeping cocktail reception for regional alphas, held in a penthouse that smelled of ozone, expensive leather, and the underlying copper tang of too many predators in one cage. I stood next to Grayson near a floor-to-ceiling window. He wore a tuxedo that tailored his savage frame into something civilized, but beneath the expensive wool, his body was vibrating wire. His hand rested on the small of my back, his grip tight enough to bruise through the heavy midnight blue silk of my dress. Through the bond, his tension bled into me, a roiling mix of territorial aggression and deep defensive anxiety. He was scanning the room, cataloging threats, waiting for the inevitable swing of the axe. They're all looking, I murmured, keeping my face neutral as a pair of sleek, blonde she-wolves whispered behind their champagne flutes, eyes darting my way. Let them look, Grayson growled softly, his jaw tight. You are the only real thing in this room, Zuri. The rest is just posturing and old money." He said it like a shield, but I felt the weight of their stares. I wasn't just the new Luna. I was the human anomaly, the bushwife, the desperate measure taken by an exiled king. I held my spine straight, the way Mama Ode had taught me when walking past the gossips in the market, but the air here was thinner, colder, harder to breathe. Then the elevator chimed at the far end of the sprawling room. The ambient noise of clinking glass and murmuring voices died instantly. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the vacuum created when all the air is sucked out of a room. A new scent hit me before I saw her. Not the earthy musk of the wolves I knew, but something sharp and synthetic. Frosted lilies, cold metal, and the terrifying scent of absolute sterility. Clara stepped out of the elevator. I had expected a monster. I had expected someone ugly with hate. I was not prepared for perfection. She was a vision of ice and platinum. Her hair was a sleek, pale helmet that caught the light like spun glass. She wore white, a stark, aggressive contrast to the dark suits and dresses in the room. A sharply tailored jumpsuit covered in subtle, shimmering crystals that made her look like she was encased in diamond dust. She didn't walk. She glided, radiating a horrifying, effortless arrogance. This was her kingdom. These glass walls, this cold air, these powerful creatures cowering in their expensive clothes, they all belonged to her. My breath hitched. Beside me, Grayson went terrifyingly still. Clara moved through the room, the alphas parting for her like tall grass before a lioness. She didn't acknowledge them. Her pale eyes, the color of a frozen lake, were locked on one target. Grayson. She came straight to us. My heart hammered against my ribs. I braced myself. I was ready for insults, for a sneer, for the kind of direct confrontation I had handled with a hemlock. I had my village spine ready. But Clara didn't look at me. It wasn't that she glanced and looked away. It was worse. It was a complete, devastating erasure. Her eyes slid over the space I occupied as if it were empty air. To her, I wasn't an opponent. I was an irrelevance, a rounding error in her calculations. She stopped inches from Grayson, invading his personal space with a sickening familiarity, ignoring the mate bond vibrating furiously between us. "Gray," she said. Her voice was expensive, low and smooth like chilled vodka. She reached out, her hand, tipped with flawless blood-red nails, brushing the lapel of his jacket, flicking away a non-existent speck of dust. It was a proprietary gesture. A claim. "You look tired, darling," she purred, her eyes devouring his face, utterly ignoring the murderous tension in his frame. "All this rough living, it really doesn't suit you. You always did need someone who knew how to take care of quality things." The insult to me was implicit, woven into the fact that she wouldn't even deign to address me directly. Grayson snapped. A snarl ripped from his chest, loud and vicious in the silent room. He slapped her hand away from his chest with a violent crack. "Do not touch me," he roared, the human facade cracking, his eyes bleeding toward wolfish gold. The bond flared hot with his revulsion and fury. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just smiled, a tiny, terrifying curve of red lips that held zero warmth. "Still so dramatic," she murmured, unbothered. She held his gaze for a second longer, letting the toxic history between them hang heavy in the air, drowning out my presence entirely. Then, with a lazy shrug of her diamond-dusted shoulder, she turned on her heel and walked toward the bar, leaving us standing there in the wake of her cold perfume. She hadn't spoken a single word to me. She hadn't needed to. She had just proven that in this glittering, cold world, I didn't even exist. The air in the penthouse remained toxic long after Clara walked away. The scent of frosted lilies hung heavy, a cloying reminder of her presence even from across the room. where she held court with a group of fawning, younger wolves. Grayson was vibrating with lethal energy beside me. The bond was a chaotic storm of rage, possessiveness, and a desperate need to incinerate the entire building. "She is trying to bait me," he growled, his voice so low only I could hear it over the polite jazz and clinking glasses. "She wants me to lose control in front of the council." "Then don't," I murmured, pressing my side firmly against his, letting him feel the steady rhythm of my human heart against his rib cage. "You are the alpha of the Wormwood Pack. You do not bark at shadows." He let out a sharp exhale, his hand squeezing my waist. "You are too wise for this pit of vipers, Zuri." Just then, an older, severe-looking alpha with stripes of gray at his temples approached. It was the council head, the host of this gilded cage. "Grayson," the alpha said unsmilingly, "a word, private chambers, now." It wasn't a request. It was a summons regarding his public outburst. Grayson went rigid. "I am not leaving my wife alone." "She is perfectly safe in this room, Anderson," the host snapped. "This is neutral ground. A council summons is mandatory. 5 minutes. Grayson looked down at me, torn. The bond pulsed with reluctance. "Go," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. I needed to show him and everyone else watching that I wasn't a trembling liability. 5 minutes, I will get water, I will stand right here." He hesitated, then pressed a hard, possessive kiss to my temple, a mark for everyone to see, before following the older wolf toward a set of heavy oak doors. As soon as the doors clicked shut behind him, the atmosphere shifted. The ambient noise of the party seemed to dampen. The air grew colder, sharper. I knew with the instinct of prey sensing a shift in the wind that I was no longer ignored. I turned toward a small table holding crystal pitchers of water, my back to the room for just a second. When I turned back with a glass in hand, she was there. Clara had moved across the room with impossible speed. She stood 3 feet from me, close enough that the synthetic chill of her scent burned my nose. Up close, she was even more terrifyingly perfect. Her skin was flawless porcelain, her eyes like chips of Arctic ice. There were no other wolves nearby. They had all instinctively given her a wide berth, creating an isolated ring of silence around us in the crowded room. The mask of bored indifference she'd worn for Grayson was gone. What replaced it was uglier, a raw, sneering disgust that twisted her beautiful features. She looked me up and down, slowly, meticulously, as if I were something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "Look at you," she said softly. Her voice wasn't honey anymore. It was ground glass. Decked out in silk, trying so hard to stand tall, it's almost adorable. Like watching a monkey try to wear human clothes. I didn't flinch. Martha's posture lessons held. I kept my spine straight, my chin level. I met her gaze and held it. "I was wondering when you would deign to notice me, Clara." Her lip curled. "Notice you? Darling, one doesn't notice the dirt on one's shoe. One simply tolerates it until it can be scraped off." She took a step closer, invading my space, trying to dwarf me with her werewolf height and radiated power. It was meant to make me cower, to trigger a prey response. But I had stared down a lioness in the bush when I was 12 years old. This woman was just a predator in better shoes. "Do you truly think you belong here?" she sneered, gesturing vaguely at the glittering room with a manicured hand. "Amongst gods? You are a mortal stain, little human." A temporary lapse in judgment Grayson indulged in while he was rolling around in the mud. The words were designed to be poison darts, targeting my insecurities about belonging, about being enough for Grayson. "He claimed me," I said quietly. "I am his wife. I am his mate. That is not temporary." Clara laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Mate? Oh, please. He was starving, traumatized, and you were the only warm body available in that god-forsaken wilderness. You're not a mate, Zuri." You're a mud hut distraction he picked up to soothe his bruised ego. He's playing house with a savage because he couldn't handle a real queen." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Look at this room. Look at the power here. You will never be one of us. You will grow old and wither in the blink of an eye while we remain eternal. He will tire of your weakness, your pathetic human fragility. You are nothing but dust waiting to happen." I felt the familiar cold spread through my chest. It wasn't fear. It was the same glacial calm that had overtaken me when the hunter held a silver knife to my throat. It was the absolute stillness before the strike. I set my water glass down on the table with a deliberate clink. I stepped forward, closing the gap she had created, refusing to yield an inch of ground. I didn't look up at her. I looked through her. "You talk much of dirt and dust, Clara," I said, my voice low, steady, grounding itself in the rhythm of my homeland. "Where I come from, we cherish the dirt. Dirt is where life begins. It is rich, it is deep, and it can nurture a seed into a mighty baobab." Clara blinked, the sneer faltering slightly at the unexpected direction of my response. "You?" I continued, letting my gaze sweep over her glittering, diamond-dusted form, seeing past the expense to the hollowness beneath. "You glisten. You shine like polished glass. You are beautiful, Clara, but glass is just heated sand that forgot where it came from." Her eyes widened slightly. The air around her seemed to crackle with insulted fury, but I didn't stop. "You are hard, you are cold, and you are sterile," I said, delivering the words with the weight of stones. "Nothing can grow on you. You have power, yes, but you are barren ground." For a heartbeat, the mighty Ice Queen looked utterly stunned. Her jaw actually went slack. She had expected tears, anger, or terrified submission. She had not expected to be philosophically dissected by the mud hut savage. The silence between us stretched, taut and dangerous. I saw the shock in her eyes turn to a murderous, humiliated rage. I had not just stood my ground. I had looked into her abyss and told her it was empty. The silence that followed my words was heavier than the humid air before a thunderstorm. For 3 seconds, Clara, the untouchable Ice Queen, just stared at me, her flawless face a mask of utter disbelief. No one spoke like that to her, certainly not a human, certainly not me. Then the mask shattered. Her scent changed instantly. The cold, synthetic, frosted lilies curdled into something acrid, metallic, and terrifyingly sharp, the scent of pure, murderous aggression. Her pale eyes flooded with an eerie, luminescent violet light. Before I could even blink, she moved. It was too fast for human eyes to track. One moment she was 3 feet away. The next she was right against me. Her hand shot out, not to strike but to grip. Her fingers tipped with those blood-red talons that were no longer just manicured nails but hardened claws, clamped onto my jaw. The strength in that grip was shocking. It wasn't human. It was iron, encased in velvet skin. She forced my head up, tilting it back so my throat was exposed, her thumb pressing painfully into the soft flesh just beneath my ear. A tiny trickle of warmth ran down my neck where one of her claws broke the skin. "You insolent little insect," she hissed, her face inches from mine. The beautiful facade was gone, replaced by a snarling muzzle of rage. "You dare speak to me of barrenness? I could snap your fragile little neck before your heart beats again. I could peel the skin from your bones right here on this expensive rug, and no one would stop me." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Fear, cold and primal, flooded my system. This was not a metaphor. This was a monster holding me. But beneath the fear, a strange, stubborn ember glowed hot. I remembered the weight of the water pot on my head, the miles walked under the unforgiving sun, the eyes of the village elders. I had not survived the bush to be cowed by a bully in diamonds. I didn't struggle. I knew it was useless against her strength. Instead, I forced myself to remain absolutely still in her grip. I kept my eyes locked on hers, refusing to look away even as the violet light pulsed. And yet, I managed to whisper, my voice tight due to the pressure on my throat, "You are the one shaking." It was true. The hand gripping my jaw was trembling with restrained fury. She wanted to kill me. The only thing stopping her was the thin veneer of civilization this party demanded. Her grip tightened painfully. I gasped as the claws dug deeper. "Zuri." The roar didn't come from the room. It echoed inside my skull, a telepathic blast of pure terror and rage that nearly buckled my knees. The bond exploded. Across the room, the heavy oak doors to the private office didn't just open, they were torn off their hinges with a deafening crash. Wood splintered, glass shattered somewhere nearby from the sheer force of the sound. Grayson erupted into the room. He wasn't the man in the tuxedo anymore. He was a blur of lethal violence, moving with that terrifying speed I had witnessed in the clearing. His eyes were molten gold, his fangs fully descended, bared in a snarl that promised annihilation. He covered the distance in 2 strides. Clara released me instantly, leaping backwards with a hiss, putting a sofa between herself and the charging Alpha. Grayson didn't chase her. He skidded to a halt in front of me, placing his massive body between me and the threat, effectively shielding me from the entire room. He was vibrating with such intense energy that I could feel the heat radiating off his back through my dress. A low, continuous growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound so primal it made the hair on my arms stand up. He was poised to kill. "Grayson." The council head, the host, hurried out of the ruined office doorway, looking pale and furious. "Control yourself, and this is neutral ground. There will be no bloodshed here." Grayson ignored him. His head snapped toward Clara, his golden eyes burning with a hatred so intense it felt physical. "If you ever," he roared, his voice a distorted, guttural thunder, "touch her again, Clara, neutral ground be damned. I will tear your throat out with my teeth." The silence in the room was absolute. Every Alpha present was staring, scenting the air, gauging the lethal intent rolling off Grayson in waves. Clara stood behind the sofa, her chest heaving. She looked pale beneath her makeup, but she straightened her spine, trying to regain her composure. "Your pet needs to learn her place, Gray," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual smooth arrogance. She was rattled. She forgets she is prey among predators. "She is my queen," Grayson growled, stepping back so his body pressed against mine, his hand finding my waist, checking for injury. His touch was shaking uncontrollably. "And she is worth 1,000 of you." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't acknowledge the host or the other Alphas. He swung me around, his arm clamped around my shoulders like a steel band, pulling me tight against his side. "We are leaving," he snarled to the room at large. He practically carried me toward the elevator, moving with a blind urgency. The crowd parted instantly, terrified faces blurring past as we swept by. No one dared to make eye contact. We hit the elevator button. The door slid open immediately. Grayson shoved me inside and hammered the lobby button. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of the party. Clara was standing where we left her, surrounded by shattered glass, looking at the closed elevator doors, with an expression that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was the cold, calculating look of a general who had just decided that a skirmish needed to become a war. The door shut, cutting off the scent of lilies and ozone, sealing us in the quiet metal box. Grayson spun toward me instantly. His large hands framed my face, tilting my head up just as Clara had done, but his touch was desperate, agonizingly gentle. His golden eyes were wide, wild with panic as he scanned my face. "Zuri," he choked out, his breath ragged. "Did she hurt you? Let me see." He saw the small wells of blood on my neck and jaw where her claws had pierced the skin. A shudder ripped through his massive frame, and a sound of pure anguish tore from his throat. Gods, I smell her on you. I smell your blood. His thumbs brushed the tiny wounds, his hands trembling so hard he could barely hold me. The bond flooded me with his crushing guilt and terror. I left you alone. I promised I wouldn't, and I left you alone with that viper. The elevator descent was a suffocating eternity. 70 floors of silence, broken only by the frantic rhythm of Grayson's breathing and the soft, slick sound of him trying to wipe Clara's scent off my skin with his thumb. He was unraveling right in front of me. The lethal roaring Alpha who had torn doors off hinges seconds ago was gone. In his place was a man consumed by a terrifying, agonizing guilt. His hands, huge and capable of such violence, were trembling so violently he could barely frame my face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words sounding like they were tearing his throat raw. "Zuri, I am so sorry. I should never have left your side, not for a second." Through the bond, his emotions hit me like a physical blow, a tidal wave of self-hatred and panic so intense it made my own head swim. He truly believed he had failed me utterly. "Grayson, stop," I managed, though my voice was shaky. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a stinging throb in my jaw and neck where Clara's claws had broken the skin. "I'm fine. She barely touched me." "She drew blood," he snarled, not at me, but at the universe. His golden eyes were fixated on the tiny crimson smudges on his thumb. "I smell it. I smell her filth on you." He ripped the expensive silk pocket square from his tuxedo jacket and pressed it gently against my neck. The white cloth immediately stained red. The sight of it made a low, wounded noise rumble deep in his chest. The elevator doors slid open in the lobby. The night concierge looked up with a polite smile that instantly vanished when he saw Grayson's face. Grayson didn't walk me to the car. He marched me. His body curled around mine like a living shield, radiating enough hostility that the few people in the lobby scattered like dry leaves in a gale. He threw me into the passenger seat of the sleek black car and slammed the door before peeling out of the garage with a screech of tires that echoed like a scream. The drive back to the safe house was a blur of speed and silent fury. Grayson gripped the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked under the strain. His knuckles were stark white, his jaw locked tight enough to snap bone. I sat frozen beside him, the reality of what had happened finally sinking in past the shock. I had stood toe-to-toe with a monster in a diamond suit. I had seen the veneer of civilization strip away to reveal the beast beneath. Clara hadn't just wanted to scare me. For those few seconds before Grayson burst in, she had wanted to end me. And she could have, easily. I looked at my hands resting in my lap against the dark blue silk of my dress. They looked small, fragile, human. We roared through the gates of the safe house estate. Before the car had even fully stopped rolling, Grayson was out and pulling my door open. Elias and Cole were on guard duty on the front porch. They straightened instantly, sensing the foul mood pouring off their Alpha. "Lock down," Grayson barked, swinging me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing. I gasped at the sudden elevation, automatically wrapping my arms around his neck. Full perimeter sweep. Nobody in or out. If a squirrel crosses the boundary line, I want to know about it. "Alpha?" Cole asked, his eyes widening as he saw the blood on the handkerchief still pressed to my neck. "Do it!" Grayson roared, kicking the front door open. We burst into the foyer just as Martha was coming down the main stairs, wiping her hands on an apron. She took one look at the scene, Grayson wild-eyed and vibrating, me cradled in his arms with blood on my neck, and her severe expression hardened into granite. "Kitchen. Now," she ordered, turning on her heel without missing a beat. "I'll get the kit." Grayson carried me into the sleek, high-tech kitchen and deposited me on the granite island counter. He didn't step back. He stood between my knees, his hands gripping the edge of the counter on either side of me, boxing me in. His breathing was still ragged. Up close, under the harsh kitchen lights, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the wild, dilated pupils of his eyes that were still more gold than gray. Martha bustled in with a white metal box. She popped the latch and began pulling out antiseptic wipes and gauze. "Let me see, child," she said briskly, reaching for my chin. A low growl ripped from Grayson's throat. He snatched the antiseptic wipe from Martha's hand. "Mine." Martha didn't argue. She just gave him a flat look, set the box down within his reach, and stepped back. "Don't make a mess of it, Alpha. She's not one of your chew toys." She left the room, taking the sucking vacuum of tension with her, leaving us alone in the stark brightness. Grayson's hands were still shaking as he unwrapped the wipe. He smelled of expensive wool, his own musk, and the metallic tang of my fear. "Tilt your head," he commanded, his voice hoarse. I obeyed, exposing the stinging wounds to the cool air. When he touched the antiseptic to my skin, I hissed at the sharp sting. He flinched violently, pulling back as if he'd been burned. "I'm sorry." "It's fine, Grayson. It's just a scratch. I've had worse from thorn bushes." "It's not just a scratch," he whispered, stepping closer again, his movements agonizingly slow and careful now. He dabbed at the cuts, his breath warm against my skin. "It's a failure. My failure." He cleaned the wounds in silence, his intense focus making the air crackle around us. When the blood was gone, revealed 3 shallow, ugly red lines etched against my dark skin just below my jawline. He stared at them, his expression crumbling into misery. He dropped the soiled wipes onto the counter, and then, slowly, he leaned in. He didn't kiss me. He pressed his forehead against my shoulder right next to the wounds. I felt a shudder run through his massive frame, and then another. He was crying, silent, racking tremors that shook him apart against me. The mighty Alpha, the wolf who had faced down an entire room of predators, was brought to his knees by 3 small scratches on my neck. My heart broke for him. The bond between us opened wide, and I poured everything I had into it. Warmth, reassurance, lack of fear. I brought my hands up to cradle the back of his head, my fingers tangling in his thick hair. "Grayson," I murmured, pulling him closer. "Look at me." He resisted for a moment, then lifted his head. His eyes were tortured pools of molten gold. "I didn't just stand there, you know," I said softly, holding his gaze with all the strength I possessed. I didn't cower. I told her exactly what she was. I saw the emptiness inside her, and I told her. His brows drew together, a flicker of confusion cutting through the guilt. "She hurt me because I hurt her first," I whispered fiercely. "I drew blood too, Grayson, just not the kind you can see." He stared at me, his breathing slowly calming as he processed my words. The wild panic in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning, fierce awe. He reached up, his large, calloused hand cupping my unharmed cheek with a tenderness that made my breath catch. "You are," he murmured, his thumb tracing my cheekbone, "the bravest, most foolish creature I have ever known." He leaned in and pressed his lips softly to the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a hungry kiss, or a claiming one. It was a desperate plea for forgiveness, and a silent vow that nothing ever again would get past him.
The rage over Clara's actions still simmered in my blood, a low, persistent growl in the back of my mind. But right now, another instinct was far louder. Need. I needed to wipe the memory of that cold, sterile penthouse from Zuri's mind. I needed to replace the lingering scent of Clara's synthetic frosted lilies with the heavy, musky perfume of our own arousal. I needed to prove to my beast, which was still pacing anxiously inside me, that she was here, she was alive, and she was ours. We were tangled in the high thread count sheets of the master bed, a vast island of luxury far removed from the sleeping mat in her hut. But the way she looked at me, eyes half-lidded, trusting dark pools of desire, was the same. "Grayson," she breathed, her hands sliding over my shoulders, her touch igniting small fires under my skin. I didn't want to talk. I moved down her body, worshipping the rich copper tone of her skin, pausing to press a reverent kiss to the faint, newly healed scar on her neck where I had marked her. "My mark." I moved lower, parting her legs. She gasped, a small, surprised sound as I settled between her thighs. I knew, from the hesitant way she had approached sex in the beginning, that her experiences in the village had been functional, perhaps even hurried. They had not been this. They had not been about her pleasure as the sole objective. I intended to ruin her for anything less than absolute worship. When I tasted her, she cried out, her back arching off the mattress. The sound was music to my savage soul. She tasted like honey and heat, an intoxicating blend that was uniquely Zuri. I used my tongue, my teeth, guiding her through peaks of sensation she'd never navigated before. Her fingers tangled in my hair, gripping tight, her breath coming in sharp, broken pants that fueled my own arousal until it was a physical ache. When she unraveled, shuddering against my mouth, calling my name in a broken sob, I felt a grim satisfaction. Mine. I crawled back up her body, my muscles coiled tight. The scent of her release was heavy in the air, driving my wolf mad. I loomed over her, my forearms braced on either side of her head. She looked wrecked in the most beautiful way possible, her lips swollen, her skin flushed. "Please," she whispered, her eyes dragging open to meet mine. The golden ring around my pupils flared. I didn't wait. I thrust into her, burying myself to the hilt in one smooth motion. A guttural roar tore from my own throat, a sound barely human. The sensation was overwhelming. She was impossibly tight, yet so incredibly slick, her body welcoming mine with a wet heat that felt like coming home. The friction was exquisite agony. She wrapped her long legs around my waist, pulling me deeper, meeting my rhythm with a natural, untamed grace that belonged to the bush she came from. Every thrust was a declaration. I claimed her with every inch of myself, marking her internally just as I had externally. I watched her face as I moved inside her, loving the way her breath hitched, the way her eyes rolled back when I hit that perfect spot. The bond between us hummed, a vibrant current of shared pleasure and intense, terrifying love. When my own release came, it was violent. I buried my face in the crook of her neck, snarling against her skin as I poured myself into her, my whole body seizing with the force of it. For those few seconds, Clara, the council, and the looming war didn't exist. There was only Zuri, slick with sweat, and my seed, held tight in my arms. Later the room was quiet, save for the hum of the air filtration system and our synchronized breathing. Zuri lay curled against my side, her head resting on my chest. I traced the line of her spine with one hand, marveling, as I always did, at the deceptively delicate architecture of her body. She was so strong in spirit, yet physically, in this world of monsters I had brought her into, she was terrifyingly fragile. The memory of Clara's claws near her throat made my beast stir uneasily. "Grayson," she said softly. The tone wasn't her usual post-coital contentment. It was the tone she used when she was about to argue with the village elders about crop rotation. I murmured, kissing the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow so she could look down at me. Her expression was serious, the soft haze of pleasure gone from her dark eyes. "We need to talk about what happened at the party, with Clara." I tightened my arm around her waist involuntarily. "You don't need to worry about her. I made it clear what would happen if she touched you again. You did, she agreed, and you were magnificent. But you were also across the room behind a closed door when she grabbed me. I flinched. The guilt was a physical sting. Zuri. No, listen to me, she interrupted, placing a hand flat on my chest, right over my beating heart. I am not blaming you, but it taught me something. I cannot fight your battles with my village strength. When she held me, Grayson, I was a child trying to wrestle a lion. If you hadn't come through that door, she would have snapped my neck. The bluntness of her words made my blood run cold. She won't get the chance again. You will have guards 24/7. I will never leave your side in public. She shook her head slowly. I will not be a prisoner, Grayson. And I will not be a liability that you have to constantly worry about protecting. If I am to be your Luna, I need to be able to stand on my own feet. You do stand on your own feet, I argued fiercely. You stood up to Hemlock. You stood up to Clara verbally. You have more spine than half the alphas in this country. Words won't stop claws, she said quietly. I need to learn how to fight. I frowned. I have already instructed Cole to begin self-defense training with you tomorrow. Basic holds, escapes. Not that kind of fighting, she said, her voice hardening. I will never be fast enough or strong enough to beat a werewolf hand to hand. It's physics. She paused, taking a deep breath, as if bracing for my reaction. I already spoke to Lucien. He knows about modern tactical gear, ballistics. She looked me dead in the eye. And silver nitrate. I sat bolt upright, nearly dislodging her. A snarl ripped from my chest before I could stop it. Absolutely not. The very word made my skin crawl. Silver was poison to my kind. It burned on contact, prevented healing, and if it entered the bloodstream, it was an agonizing death sentence. The idea of Zuri, my warm human mate, handling the substance that was designed to genocide my people was revolting. Grayson, be reasonable. Reasonable, I roared, swinging my legs over the side of the bed and standing up, needing to pace. The proximity of the subject made me twitchy. You are asking to train with the one thing that can kill me just by touching it. You want to bring poison into our home. I want to bring insurance into our home, she shot back, sitting up, letting the sheet fall away from her naked breasts. She didn't care about modesty right now. She was fighting for her survival. Clara has hunters. They use silver. Why should they have the advantage? If someone comes for me again, I won't just be waiting for you to save me. I want to be able to put them down. I am your mate. It is my primal duty to protect you. And it is my duty to survive, she cried, sliding off the bed to stand before me. She looked small next to my naked, hulking frame, but she didn't back down an inch. You brought me into a war zone, Grayson. Don't forbid me from carrying a weapon. My chest heaved. My wolf was furious at the disrespect, terrified at the thought of her near silver, and yet, underneath it all, a grudging, powerful respect was blooming. She was right. She was human in a world of apex predators. If she wanted to survive, she couldn't fight fair. She had to fight dirty. She had to fight lethal. She took a step closer, placing her hands on my rigid arms. Teach me how to be dangerous, my love, she whispered fiercely, so that I can be worthy of standing beside the king. I looked down into her determined face. I hated it. I hated that she had to harden herself, that the soft curves I had just cherished needed to be armored. But she was no longer just a village girl. She was the Alpha's wife. With a groan of defeat, I pulled her roughly against my chest, burying my face in her neck, right over the healing scratches Clara had left. Lucien will supervise every second, I growled into her skin, the vibration rattling through her. If you get so much as a speck of silver dust on your skin, the training ends. Do you understand me? She wrapped her arms tight around my waist. I understand. I had just authorized my wife to become a hunter of my own kind. God help us both. The perimeter alarms didn't blare. They pulsed a low, subsonic warning that vibrated in my molars before the sound ever hit human ears. I was out of bed before the first red strobe lit the wall of the master suite. I was already reaching for my tactical gear, old habits from the exile dying hard, when Zuri sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes, but instantly alert. "Stay here," I commanded, buckling a holster tight against my thigh. I didn't grab a gun, my claws were faster. "Elias has the gate." She was already out of bed, pulling on a thick robe, her jaw set in that stubborn line I was coming to know too well. "Don't be ridiculous, Grayson. If we are under attack, I'm not sitting in the dark waiting for a report." I turned to argue, my wolf bristling at her defiance in the face of potential danger, but the look in her eyes stopped me cold. It was the same look she'd given me when she demanded the silver training. She was done hiding. "Stay behind me," I compromised, a low growl of frustration in my tone. "If I tell you to run to the panic room, you run, no debate." She nodded once, sharp and efficient. "Agreed." We moved quickly through the silent house, the modern architecture feeling cold and fortress-like in the dead of night. We met Cole in the foyer. He was fully shifted up to his shoulders, coarse hair bristling along his jaw, holding an assault rifle looking relaxed in his massive hands. "Report," I barked. "Not an attack team, Alpha," Cole said, his voice roughened by the partial shift. "5 of them at the north gate. They're on their knees, hands visible." My blood ran cold, then hot with a familiar, agonizing fury. I knew who they were before Cole even finished the sentence. I could smell them now, drifting in on the damp night air through the ventilation system. The stale, underlying scent of my old pack, overlaid with the cloying, synthetic stench of Clara's influence and thick, sour fear. Traitors. "Keep them covered," I snarled, pushing past him toward the front door. "If any of them so much as flinches, put them down." Zuri was right on my heels as I stalked out into the chilly night. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots as we approached the massive steel gates. The security lights blazed, illuminating 5 miserable figures kneeling in the mud just outside the perimeter fence. They were soaking wet from the light rain, shivering violently. They looked gaunt, their clothes expensive but ruined, their eyes wide and terrified in the harsh light. I recognized every single one of them. Marcus, a former perimeter guard who used to share cigarettes with Elias. Sarah, who had worked in the pack nurseries. 3 younger wolves who had barely presented when I was exiled. They had all stood by and watched Clara strip me of my rank. They had chosen her promises of wealth and modernity over ancient loyalty. "Open it," I ordered the gate controller through my comm link. The heavy metal slid back just enough to let me step through, my body vibrating with restrained violence. I didn't shift, but I let my alpha aura roll off me in suffocating waves, pressing them down further into the mud. Marcus looked up, his face streaked with rain and grime. "Alpha Grayson," he choked out. "You have no right to use that title," I roared, the sound echoing off the distant trees. "You lost that right when you let that bitch poison our lands and exile your rightful king. Why shouldn't I gut you right here for trespassing?" "Mercy," Sarah whispered, her head bowed so low her nose touched the wet asphalt. "Please, Alpha. We made a mistake." "A mistake is taking a wrong turn," I spat, pacing in front of them, fighting the urge to backhand Marcus across the face. "Betrayal is a choice. You chose her." "She's mad," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "It's not a pack anymore, Alpha. It's a dictatorship. If you question her, you don't eat. If you look at her wrong, her mercenaries beat you with silver-tipped canes. She's hoarding wealth while the lower ranks starve. We couldn't take it. We ran." ran because the kitchen got too hot, I countered coldly. Not because you suddenly discovered a conscience. You're cowards. Go back to your mistress before I finish what the elements started. I turned my back on them, ready to order the gate closed. My wolf felt justified, righteous in its anger. Treason carried a death sentence in the old ways. Exile was a mercy they didn't deserve. Wait. Zuri's voice was quiet, but it cut through the thick tension like a blade of grass through concrete. I spun around. She had stepped past me, moving toward the kneeling wolves. Zuri, get back, I warned, my heart leaping into my throat. They were weak, but they were still desperate predators. She ignored me. She stopped 3 feet from Marcus, looking down at him not with anger, but with a terrifying, clinical assessment. She looked like a village elder inspecting diseased livestock, calculating the risk versus the value. You say she starves you, Zuri said, her voice calm and grounded amidst the swirling supernatural aggression. Marcus looked up at her, confused by this human woman addressing him. He scented the air, his brow furrowing as he realized what she was to me. Yes, Luna, the lower ranks get scraps. Zuri hummed. She looked at the younger wolves, shivering in their thin jackets. She looked at Sarah's hands, which were bleeding from scrambling through the woods. Then she turned to me. Her dark eyes were unreadable in the harsh security light. In my village, she said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. When a drought comes, people do desperate things to feed their families. Sometimes they steal from their neighbors. Sometimes they hoard. This isn't a drought, Zuri, I argued, my patience fraying. This is war. These are deserters. Are they? She tilted her head. Or are they refugees fleeing a tyrant? You told me you wanted to build something better than what Clara has created, something stronger. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear, though the bond broadcast her intent loud and clear. If you turn them away to die in the cold, Grayson, how are you different from her? You prove her right, that the old ways are cruel. My jaw tightened. They cannot be trusted. No, she agreed readily. Trust is earned. But strength is shown by mercy when you hold all the power. She looked back at the pathetic group. A smart chief doesn't kill the workers who flee a bad master. He puts them to work in his own fields, and he feeds them well so they never want to leave again. I stared at her, my beautiful human wife, standing in the rain in a bathrobe, schooling an ancient alpha on pack politics, using farming metaphors. And God help me, she was right. If I took them in, word would spread. Clara's grip relied on fear. Mine could rely on stability. It was a tactical advantage I'd been too blinded by rage to see. I let out a long, shuddering breath, the murderous tension slowly leaking out of my shoulders. I looked at Marcus, who was watching Zuri with an expression of dawning awe. You heard your Luna, I growled, the title tasting heavy and right on my tongue. Get up. They scrambled to their feet, swaying with exhaustion, looking between me and Zuri as if they couldn't believe they were still breathing. You are on probation, I decreed, my voice hard as granite. You will start at the very bottom. You will sleep in the bunkhouse. You will do the filthiest jobs Martha can find for you. And you will be watched every second of every day. If you so much as look sideways at my mate or my loyal crew, I will not exile you again. I will bury you. Thank you, Alpha. Marcus wept, actually wept. Thank you. Don't thank me, I snapped, jerking my chin towards Zuri, who stood stoic and calm beside me. Thank her, and never forget who saved your worthless hides tonight. I turned and marched back toward the house. Behind me, I heard Zuri issuing calm, practical orders to Cole about getting them blankets and water before locking them in the bunkhouse. I looked up at the house porch. Martha and Elias were standing there, having watched the entire exchange. Martha's severe face was unreadable. But as Zuri walked past her to enter the house, the older she-wolf gave a stiff, deeply respectful nod, a gesture she rarely offered anyone but me. Elias looked at Zuri with wide eyes, a new kind of wary respect replacing his previous dismissal. Zuri hadn't just saved 5 pathetic lives tonight. She had just staked her claim as the true mother of this burgeoning dynasty. She wasn't just Grayson Anderson's human mate anymore. She was the Luna, and God help anyone who forgot it. The silence was the hardest thing to get used to. For weeks, my existence had been defined by the high-frequency whine of security grids, the crackle of comms, the subsonic growls of my guards, and the intrusive, cloying scent of Clara's encroaching malice. But tonight, up here on the highest ridge of the estate, miles away from the main house and its subterranean bunkers, there was only the wind sighing through the ancient oaks and the vast, terrifying expanse of the British sky. I sat with my back against a massive, smooth stone, my legs stretched out in the damp heather. Zuri sat between them, her back resting against my chest, wrapped in 3 layers of thermal gear and my heaviest wool coat. Even then, I kept my body temperature cranked high, radiating heat like a furnace to keep the biting chill from her human skin. We hadn't spoken in an hour. We didn't need to. This location was a calculated risk, a blind spot in our own security net, a place where technology failed and only primal senses mattered. I needed to get her away from the sterile lights of the bunker. I needed her to see the sky, even if it wasn't the star-clotted velvet of her home. "It's different," she murmured, her voice vibrating against my sternum. She was looking up at the hazy, light-polluted clouds drifting past the moon. "The sky here feels lower, heavy. It's the moisture," I said softly, resting my chin on the woolen cap covering her hair. "It weighs everything down." "I miss the heat," she confessed quietly. "I miss the smell of dry earth baking in sun." A pang of guilt, sharp and familiar, twisted in my gut. I had torn her from everything she knew and dropped her into a frozen war zone. "I know," I whispered into her hair. "One day, when this is over, I will take you back. We will build a summer lodge near your village. You will have your son." She shifted, turning in my arms so she could look at me. The moonlight turned the planes of her face into striking silver and shadow. Her eyes were impossibly deep. "No," she said firmly. "My home is where you are, Grayson, where we build our pack. I don't want to go back to who I was. I just need a moment to catch my breath in who I am becoming." She reached out, her gloved hand cupping my jaw, her thumb tracing the rough stubble. "You were right to bring them in," I said. The words were hard to get out. Admitting I was wrong, especially about pack security, went against every alpha instinct I had. Marcus and the others. The mood in the barracks has changed. They aren't just guards anymore. They're starting to feel like a community again. Zuri smiled, a small, gentle curve of her lips. "Fear is a powerful motivator, my love. Clara knows this. But it burns fast like dry grass. Loyalty built on respect. That is like the baobab tree. It takes time to grow, but it survives the deepest droughts." I stared at her, struck dumb for the 1,000th time by the ancient, grounded wisdom that lived inside this woman who had never set foot in a boardroom or a war council. She saw things I couldn't, the human heart inside the wolf. "How do you do that?" I murmured, turning my head to press a kiss into her palm. "Do what?" "Make me see the world differently. Before you, everything was hierarchy. Power dynamics, threat assessment. You look at a starving traitor and see a future ally. You look at me," my voice roughened, "and you don't see a monster." "I see a king," she whispered fiercely. "But a king cannot rule alone, and a wolf cannot be all teeth." She leaned up, and kissed me. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kissing of the last few weeks, the kind born of adrenaline and the terrifying need to prove we were still alive. This was slow, deliberate, a tasting. The mate bond, usually a roaring furnace demanding consumption, hummed low in my veins. It was a deep, resonant vibration of absolute belonging. Tonight wasn't about the beast's need to claim. It was about the man's need to cherish. I shifted, lifting her easily and laying her back on the bed of heather and my spread-out coat. The cold air bit at my skin as I leaned over her, shielding her from the wind with my body. I took my time. I unwrapped her from the layers of winter gear slowly, reverently, kissing every inch of skin as it was revealed to the moonlight. When she lay naked beneath me, shivering slightly not from cold but from anticipation, she looked like a deity carved from obsidian and moonlight. "You are so beautiful it hurts me," I groaned, my forehead resting against hers. "Show me," she breathed, her legs shifting to wrap around my waist. I entered her slowly, exquisitely slowly. There was no rush, no threat of interruption. I watched her eyes flutter closed, heard the sharp intake of her breath as I filled her completely. It was different this time, deeper somehow, not just physically, but emotionally. With every slow thrust, I felt like I was weaving our souls closer together. It wasn't a conquest, it was a communion. I held my own strength on a tight leash, moving with a restraint that made my muscles tremble. I wanted her to feel every second of it, to feel the weight of my devotion. She met my gaze, her dark eyes shining with tears that didn't fall. She reached up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck, pulling me down for a kiss that tasted of salt and promises. We moved together under the heavy sky, two refugees from different worlds, forging a new one in the space between our bodies. When the climax came, it didn't hit like a thunderclap. It was a slow rising tide that lifted us both, leaving us breathless and clinging to each other as the waves receded. I stayed buried inside her long after, unwilling to break the connection, my weight supported on my forearms so I didn't crush her. I watched her chest rise and fall, felt the rapid flutter of her human heart against my ribs keeping time with my slower, heavier one. The war was still waiting for us down the hill. Clara was still plotting. The hunters were still sharpening their silver. Tomorrow, Zuri would go back to training to kill my kind, and I would go back to plotting the destruction of my ex-lover. But tonight, lying under the indifferent stars with the woman who had civilized my soul, I felt a profound, unbreakable calm. Let the storm break. We were the eye, and we were ready. The peace of the ridge was a lie, the calm before the slaughter. The attack didn't start with a howl. It started with a seismic boom that shook the reinforced foundations of the safe house right through the mattress. Before my conscious brain registered the sound of C4 blowing our outer perimeter gate, my body was already moving. I launched from the bed, a snarl ripping from my throat, my elongated canines already cutting into my lower lip. The room plunged into emergency red lighting. The synchronized wail of sirens was deafening, a cacophony designed to panic intruders, but it only fed my rage. "Zuri!" I roared over the noise, grabbing her shoulders as she sat up, blinking against the strobing lights. "I hear it," she said. Her voice wasn't trembling. It was tight, clipped, adrenaline-fueled. "The bunker, now. Martha is already moving the non-combatants." My hands were shaking, not with fear for myself, but with the terrifying knowledge that the war had finally breached our sanctuary. The scent of cordite and burning metal was already filtering into the air system, mixing with the sickening, unfamiliar musk of rogue wolves. She looked at me, her dark eyes hard in the crimson light. "I am going to the command center." My wolf reared up. "You are going to the safest room in this facility and locking the door." No, Grayson. She grabbed my forearms, her grip surprisingly strong. We discussed this. You fight the war outside. I run the house inside. I can't direct the human guards from inside a steel box. There was no time to argue. Every second wasted was a second Clara's mercenaries drew closer to her. I looked into her eyes and saw the same immovable resolve that had stared down a lion in the bush. Stay on comms, I growled, kissing her hard, a desperate bruising collision of mouths. If they breach the inner doors, you retreat to the vault. Promise me. Go. She pushed me toward the door. Kill them all. That permission was all the beast needed. I tore out of the bedroom, my clothes shredding as I didn't bother to stop the shift. Bones cracked and rearranged in a symphony of agony I barely felt. By the time I hit the bottom of the stairs, I was on 4 paws, a massive black engine of destruction, my claws gouging furrows into the polished hardwood floors. The foyer was chaos. Elias was there, fully shifted, a hulking grey brute wrestling with 2 smaller, mangy rogues who had somehow breached a window. I didn't slow down. I ploughed into the melee, my jaws snapping around the spine of the nearest rogue. There was a sickening crunch, a yelp cut short, and I tossed the broken body aside, already moving toward the front door. Outside, the night was on fire. The sophisticated lighting system of the estate had been blown out, replaced by the erratic orange glow of burning vehicles at the front gate. The air was thick with smoke, the metallic tang of blood, and the overwhelming stench of trespassers. It was a 2-pronged assault. Clara had sent human mercenaries armed with assault rifles, and I could smell the acrid bitterness of it even through the smoke, silver-tipped rounds. They were taking cover behind the landscaping, laying down suppressing fire. But the real threat were the wolves. Dozens of them. They were a wretched pack, mercenaries with no allegiance but coin, rogues drunk on the promise of violence. They swarmed over the walls like rats. A spray of bullets kicked up the gravel around me. One grazed my shoulder, a searing line of fire that healed almost instantly, but the insult enraged me further. I let out a roar that silenced the gunfire for half a heartbeat. It was a challenge, a promise of absolute annihilation. Then I charged. I hit the mercenary line like a freight train. A human in tactical gear raised his rifle. I didn't bother dodging. I swiped with a massive paw, my claws tearing through Kevlar and flesh like wet paper. He was dead before he hit the ground. The beast took over. It was a blur of visceral violence. I was faster, stronger, and infinitely more furious than anything Clara had brought. I ripped throats, broke limbs, moving through the enemy ranks with an efficiency born of ancient instinct. Through the haze of bloodlust, I could feel the pack working. Cole and Marcus, the traitor who had begged for entry just days ago, were holding the east flank, fighting back to back in wolf form. They were outnumbered, but fighting with the desperation of men defending their only home. Alpha, west wall is buckling. They have a thermal lance cutting the hinges. Lucien's voice crackled in my earpiece, which was embedded in my ear canal. Hold them, I snarled back, the words distorted by my wolf larynx. Grayson, Zuri's voice cut through the noise, calm and anchoring in the storm of violence. Command reports 3 distinct groups pressing the main house. We are deploying the internal countermeasures. Gas in the mudroom entry. Electric grid active on the lower windows. Hearing her voice, cold and tactical, sent a fresh surge of power through me. She was safe. She was fighting. Keep them out, Luna, I thought fiercely towards her. A massive rogue wolf, almost as big as me but patchy with mange, slammed into my side, knocking me off balance. Teeth sunk into the thick ruff of fur at my neck, aiming for the jugular. I didn't panic. I dropped my weight, rolling with the momentum, using my superior bulk to pin the attacker beneath me. I didn't hesitate. I buried my fangs in his throat and ripped. Hot blood sprayed across my muzzle. I stood over the twitching body, chest heaving, surveying the battlefield. The ground was littered with bodies, human and wolf alike. The mercenaries were breaking, terrified by the sheer brutality of the defense. The rogue wolves, realizing they weren't facing easy prey, were starting to hang back, circling nervously. We were winning. It was brutal, it was messy, but we were holding the line. But as I stood there, bathed in blood and firelight, the adrenaline humming in my veins, a cold tendril of unease snaked through my gut. It was too much noise, too much frontal assault. Clara was arrogant, yes, but she wasn't stupid. Throwing this many bodies at a fortified position just to wear us down didn't feel like her endgame. This felt like a distraction. A magician waving one hand violently so you didn't watch the other. "Lucien," I barked into the comms, ignoring the few remaining rogues snapping at my heels. "Where is the secondary breach team? This is too loud." "No other contacts on sensors, Alpha. They threw everything at the front door." My wolf growled low in my throat. "No, they didn't." I turned toward the house, my eyes scanning the dark upper windows, a terrible premonition settling over me. The noise outside was deafening, but it was the silence from the shadowed side of the house that suddenly screamed at me.
The comms room was the nerve center of the bunker. A windowless steel box humming with the sound of servers and lit by the frantic strobing of 20 different security monitors. The noise from above ground filtered down through the ventilation shafts, a muffled, continuous roar of gunfire, inhuman snarls, and things exploding. It sounded like hell had opened up on the front lawn. "Sector 4 is buckling," Martha said. The older Omega was seated at the console next to me, her severe gray bun coming loose, her fingers flying across a keyboard as she rerouted power to the external fences. "They're using the burning vehicles as cover." "Tell Cole to pull back to the secondary line," I ordered, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, every instinct screaming at me to curl into a ball. But I couldn't. I was the Luna. These people were looking to me. "If they breach the courtyard, activate the sprinklers. The water pressure should slow them down." Martha nodded, relaying the order. On the main monitor, I caught a glimpse of Grayson. He was a blur of massive black fur and violence in the firelight, tearing through a knot of mercenaries near the gate. Just watching him made my breath hitch, a terrifying mixture of awe and primal fear of the beast I shared a bed with. Through our bond, I felt a chaotic wash of his emotions. Battle lust, protective fury, and a deep thrumming anxiety for me. "Zuri status?" His voice growled in my earpiece, thick with the shift. "We are holding the inner perimeter," I said, gripping the edge of the console until my knuckles turned white, "but they are relentless." Suddenly, Martha gasped, leaning closer to her screen. "Something is wrong." "What?" "The west flank, the rogue wolves, they're retreating. It's too organized. They aren't breaking, they're pulling back on command." A chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's air conditioning sliced through me. I looked at the monitors. The chaotic swarming on the thermal cameras was thinning out. "Grayson," I said urgently into the mic, "they're pulling back. It feels wrong." "I see it," he snarled. "They're funneling toward the tree line. I smell him, the alpha of this wretched pack. He's running." A massive explosion rocked the foundations, much closer than the others. Dust sifted down from the ceiling tiles. "They set charges on the generator housing," Grayson roared. "If that blows, we lose power to the lower levels. You'll be trapped in the dark." My stomach dropped. "Go," I told him, the word tasting like ash. "Stop them." "Keep the doors sealed. I will return." On the monitor, I watched the black shape of my husband break away from the main house, sprinting toward the dark woods in pursuit of the retreating rogues and the threat to the generators. I watched him go, and I felt the distance between us stretch the mate bond thin, like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. The noise outside began to fade. The gunfire became sporadic, then stopped. The snarling died down. Silence fell over the bunker. It was heavy, suffocating, and infinitely worse than the noise. "They gave up too easily," Martha whispered, standing up slowly. Her nostrils flared, scenting the recycled air. "Why did they give up?" I stood too, my hand moving instinctively to the waistband of my trousers, at the small of my back. The cold metal of the silver-loaded handgun Lucian had given me pressed against my spine. "Don't be a damsel," I told myself fiercely. "You faced a lion. You can face this." "Martha," I said quietly, "check the internal sensors, the vents, the service tunnels." Martha turned back to the console, but before her fingers touched the keys, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the room plunged into darkness, save for the emergency red mood lighting that bathed everything in the color of blood. The electronic lock on the heavy steel door to the corridor beeped, a long, descending tone of failure. Click. The heavy deadbolt slid back. It wasn't possible. That door only opened from the inside, or with Grayson's biometric override. "Get behind the desk," Martha hissed at me, her body beginning to shudder as she forced a partial shift. Claws lengthened from her fingers and her jaw elongated with a sickening crack. The door didn't burst open. It swung inward slowly, smoothly, on well-oiled hinges. A scent drifted into the room, overpowering the smell of ozone and fear. It was rich, expensive, and cloying. Jasmine, tuberose, and something underneath it that smelled like ancient, spoiled meat. Chanel No. 5 and madness. Clara stepped over the threshold. She looked devastatingly out of place. The world outside was burning, mud and blood covering everything, but Clara looked like she had just stepped out of a Bond Street salon. Her blonde hair was a sleek, shining helmet. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse that should have been ruined in a war zone and tailored black trousers. Her eyes, however, were not human. They were bright yellow, glowing with a ferocious, unhinged light in the red gloom. She smiled when she saw us. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It just stretched the skin over her teeth. "Knock, knock," she purred. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. "Clara," Martha growled, stepping in front of me, her body hunched in a defensive posture. "You are forbidden from this holy ground. You are exile." Clara laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Martha, still playing the loyal nanny. It's adorable, really." She moved so fast my human eyes couldn't track it. One second she was by the door, the next she was a blur of silk and violence. She backhanded Martha. It looked effortless, like swatting a fly, but the sound of the impact was sickening. Martha flew across the room, crashing into a bank of server racks with a shower of sparks. She hit the floor and didn't move. "Martha!" I screamed, starting forward. Clara stopped me with a look. She didn't even shift. She just stood there, radiating a power so suffocating it felt like a physical weight on my chest. "Look at you," Clara murmured, walking slowly toward me. I backed up until my hips hit the console desk. "The little village pet in her high-tech cage. Did you really think he wouldn't find out? That he wouldn't realize what you are?" "He loves me," I said, my voice shaking, despite my best efforts. I hated the weakness in it. Clara's face contorted, the beautiful mask slipping to reveal the snarling beast beneath. "Love? He doesn't know how to love anything that isn't a wolf. You're a novelty, darling. A bit of exotic rough he picked up on his travels to annoy me. He's pity-fucking you because he feels guilty about your pathetic little life." She was close now, too close. I could smell the madness on her breath. "He left you. she whispered conspiratorially, leaning in so her flawless face was inches from mine. I snapped my fingers, sent a few mutts into the woods, and he ran right to them. He left you here, unprotected, because deep down, he knows you don't matter. Tears pricked my eyes, not from her words, which were poison lies, but from sheer, overwhelming terror. My hand crept behind my back, fingers wrapping around the textured grip of the gun. "You're wrong," I managed to say, my chin lifting stubbornly. The village girl who refused to back down was still in here somewhere. "He didn't leave me unprotected. He taught me how to fight." Clara threw her head back and laughed, a genuine howling sound that made my blood run cold. "Fight? You? Oh, darling, you're going to try to hit me with your little human hands? Please, do it. I want an excuse to tear that pretty dark skin off your—" I didn't let her finish. I ripped the gun from my waistband, thumbing the safety off just as Lucien had taught me. I didn't aim. At this range, I didn't have to. I just jammed the barrel into the soft silk of her blouse right over her stomach and pulled the trigger. The boom was deafening in the small room. Clara didn't scream. She made a sound of pure, shocked disbelief, a wet gasp. She stumbled back 2 steps, looking down at the spreading crimson stain on her cream silk. The silver hollow point hadn't killed her, but it was burning inside her like a coal from hell. Her yellow eyes snapped up to mine, no longer smug. They were wide with agony and a sudden, terrifying realization. "You little bitch," she hissed, blood coating her teeth. Then she shrieked, a sound that shattered the remaining monitors, and lunged for my throat. I thought shooting her would stop her. I thought a silver bullet in the gut would drop a werewolf the way a lead slug dropped a gazelle. I was wrong. It only made her angrier. Clara hit me with the force of a falling tree. The impact drove the breath from my lungs in an agonizing whoosh, knocking me backward off my feet. The handgun flew from my grip, skittering across the metal floor into the darkness under the server racks. We slammed into the opposite wall, my head cracking against a steel junction box. Stars exploded behind my eye, blurring the red-lit nightmare room. She was on top of me instantly, a suffocating weight of silk, expensive perfume, and feral rage. Her hands, perfectly manicured, tipped with razor-sharp claws, wrapped around my throat. "You filthy little monkey," she spat, her face inches from mine. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from her bared fangs onto my cheek. "You think you can kill a queen?" Her grip tightened. My windpipe felt like it was being crushed in a hydraulic press. I clawed at her wrists, my fingernails useless against her unnatural skin. I tried to kick, to buck her off, but it was like trying to bench press a boulder. The wound in her stomach was bleeding sluggishly, the silver cauterizing the flesh as it burned, sending up wisps of acrid smoke. The pain must have been excruciating, but she was running on pure adrenaline and ancient hatred. "He's never going to love you," she hissed, her yellow eyes manic. "You're a pet, a warm hole for the winter. When he realizes you're broken, he'll toss you out and come back to his own kind. Back to me." The edges of my vision were turning black. The lack of oxygen made my chest burn. "You are going to die here," a small, terrified voice whispered in my head. "You are just a human in a room of monsters." Then another voice answered, sharper, louder. It sounded like my father. "You faced the lion in the long grass, Zuri. You did not run then. Do not run now." This woman wasn't a goddess. She wasn't a queen. She was just another predator in the dark, and I was not prey. My flailing hand hit the side of the main console. My fingers scrabbled against the smooth plastic, searching. The smart house, I thought, through the haze of suffocation. Use the damn smart house. I hated the tech. I hated how it watched me, how complex it was. But Grayson had made me learn it. My fingers found the smooth indentation of the biometric override panel. I slammed my palm against it. Authorization, Zuri Anderson. I choked out, the words barely a whisper. The system recognized the desperation in my voice, or maybe just my palm print. Command? The synthesized voice queried calmly. Override protocol Alpha 7, I gasped. Execute. Alpha 7, the riot control protocol. Instantly, the soothing red emergency lights vanished. The room was blasted with high-intensity tactical floodlights, thousands of lumens of stark, blinding white light designed to overload night vision goggles and sensitive retinas. At the same moment, the fire suppression alarm tripped. Not a siren, but a high-frequency sonic emitter designed to be excruciating to canine hearing. Clara shrieked, a sound of pure agony. Her hands flew from my throat to cover her ears as the blinding light seared her sensitive eyes, and the sonic whine drove spikes into her brain. She reeled backward, stumbling away from me, crashing into a desk. I rolled onto my side, gasping, dragging air into my bruised throat in wheezing gulps. The light was blinding to me too, and the sound made my teeth ache, but I wasn't a wolf. It didn't cripple me. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, putting distance between us. I needed a weapon. The gun was gone. Clara was recovering fast. She shook her head violently, snarling, trying to clear the sensory overload. Her yellow eyes squinted against the glare, locked onto me again. Clever trick, she growled, her voice distorted by pain and fury. It won't save you. She crouched to spring. She was going to tear me apart. I could see it in the way her muscles coiled. Lucien, I thought desperately, the ankle holster. He had given me the gun, but he had insisted on the backup. Wolves don't expect steel low to the ground, Luna. I yanked up the cuff of my tactical trousers. The leather sheath was there, strapped to my calf. Clara lunged. She covered the distance in a single bound, her claws aiming for my face. I didn't try to dodge. I dropped to one knee, making myself smaller, and ripped the 6-inch combat knife from its sheath. It wasn't just steel. The blade had been forged with a core of pure silver. As her body collided with mine, knocking me flat onto my back again, I drove the knife upward with both hands, putting every ounce of my village strength, every ounce of my rage behind the thrust. I felt resistance, muscle, sinew, and then the sickening slide as the blade buried itself to the hilt in her chest just below her ribs, angling upward toward her heart. Clara's momentum carried her down onto me. Her jaws snapped inches from my nose, but the strength behind them was gone. Her eyes went wide, the yellow light flickering out. She let out a wet, gurgling gasp. The smell of burning meat was sudden and overwhelming as the silver blade cooked her insides. "Get off my land," I snarled, shoving her dead weight upward. She staggered back, pulling the knife from my grip as she moved. She stood for a second, swaying, looking down at the hilt protruding from her designer blouse. She looked utterly bewildered. Then her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the metal grating of the floor, twitching once, then twice. And then the queen was still. I lay on the floor, staring up at the blinding white lights, my chest heaving, my throat throbbing where her hands had been. The sonic alarm shrieked on, a fitting soundtrack to the silence of the dead room. I had killed her. I, Zuri of the village, had killed an alpha female. I started to shake, a violent reaction to the adrenaline crash, but beneath the terror, something else was taking root in my soul. Something cold and hard and absolutely unbreakable. I sat up slowly, wiping blood from my cheek with the back of my hand. I looked at Clara's body, then at the unconscious form of Martha. I wasn't a damsel, and I was done hiding in bunkers. The sonic alarm was a drill bit in my skull. The blinding white lights made the blood on the floor look like tar. I crawled over to Martha. She was breathing, thank God, a shallow rhythm against the cold metal grating. A nasty gash split her forehead where she'd hit the server rack, but she was alive. I sat back on my heels, my body vibrating so hard my teeth chattered. My hand went to my throat. It felt swollen, tender, the skin likely purple with bruises from Clara's manicured claws. Clara. I looked toward the center of the room. She hadn't moved. The hilt of Lucien's combat knife protruded from her chest like a grotesque tombstone. The smell of searing meat, silver-burning werewolf flesh, was thicker now, acrid and oily, mixing with the jasmine perfume until I wanted to gag. She was making a sound now, a wet, rhythmic wheezing. Not dead. Not yet. The silver was eating her alive, a slow, agonizing execution. Suddenly, the mate bond, which had been a tight wire of anxiety in the back of my mind, snapped taut. A wave of pure, distilled terror washed over me, not mine, but Grayson's. It was followed instantly by a volcanic eruption of rage so potent it made my own heart stutter. He knew. He had realized it was a trap, and he could feel my fear. Zuri! His roar didn't come through the comms. It echoed down the concrete corridor outside the bunker door, a sound so primal it made the steel walls vibrate. It was the sound of a monster that had realized its mate was cornered. A second later, a massive black shape exploded through the already open doorway. Grayson didn't just enter the room, he invaded it. He was fully shifted, a nightmare shadow against the blinding lights, his fur bristling, his muzzle slick with the blood of the rogues outside. His claws gouged deep furrows into the metal flooring as he skidded to a halt, his chest heaving like a bellows. His golden eyes were wild, darting around the wreckage of the command center. They landed on Martha, unconscious by the servers. Then they snapped to Clara, twitching on the floor, the knife in her chest. Finally, they found me. I saw the change happen. The moment his eyes registered the bruises on my neck, the blood smeared on my cheek, the sheer terror radiating from me, the calculating intelligence in his gaze evaporated. There was only the beast left, a beast whose territory had been breached and whose mate had been harmed. A sound tore from his throat that wasn't a howl or growl. It was a shriek of pure, destructive fury. He didn't care that Clara was already down. He didn't care that the silver was killing her. She was the threat. She had touched me. He crossed the room in a blur of motion. He loomed over Clara's prone form, his shadow swallowing her up. Clara's eyes fluttered open. The yellow glow was dim now, clouded with agony. She looked up at the monster she had once claimed to love, and I saw a flicker of genuine mortal terror in her face. She tried to speak, pink froth bubbling at her lips. He didn't let her finish. He didn't hesitate. There was no mercy in him, only an ancient, violent imperative to eliminate the threat. He lowered his massive head. His jaws snapped around her throat, just above where her hands had strangled me moments before. There was a sickening, wet crunch, a violent tear. Clara's body convulsed once violently and then went completely slack. Grayson lifted his head, his muzzle coated in fresh, bright blood. He dropped what was left of her throat. He spat on the corpse, a final guttural rejection of everything she was. The queen was dead. The war was over. The silence in the room, save for the shrieking alarm, was absolute. Grayson turned slowly. The red haze was clearing from his eyes, replaced by a desperate, frantic need that hit me through the bond like a physical blow. He stumbled toward me, his body already beginning the agonizing process of shifting back. Bones popped and reshaped themselves. Black fur retreated into tanned skin. By the time he reached me, he was human, naked, covered in blood and grime, his chest heaving. He dropped to his knees in front of me, ignoring the blinding lights and the noise. His hands, human hands now shaking violently, hovered over me, as if terrified that touching me would break me. "Zuri," he choked out. His voice was ruined, raw from roaring. "Zuri, look at me." I looked up at him. My tough, unyielding alpha looked shattered. There were tears cutting tracks through the blood on his face. "The alarm," I whispered, my voice a painful croak. "Turn off the damn alarm." He blinked, as if realizing for the first time that the room was screaming at us. He lunged for the console, smashing his fist onto the manual override button. Silence crashed down on the room. Instant, blissful silence. He was back in front of me in a heartbeat. His hands finally landed on my shoulders, scorching hot, desperate. He ran them down my arms, checking for breaks, then up to my face, cupping my jaw so gently it made my heart ache. His thumbs traced the bruises on my neck, and a low, dangerous growl vibrated in his chest again. "I wasn't here," he whispered, the words laced with self-loathing. "I left you. It was a trap, and I left you." "I killed her," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, heavy. "Grayson, I put the knife in her heart." He froze. His eyes moved past me to the body on the floor, seeing the silver hilt for the first time. He looked back at me, a profound, stunned realization dawning in his gaze. "You defended the pack," he murmured, awe mixing with the horror in his eyes. He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath hot and coppery with blood. "My brave, stubborn mate, you held the line." The adrenaline crashed out of my system all at once. I started to shake uncontrollably. The tears finally broke free, hot and fast. "Get me out of here," I sobbed, clinging to his blood-slicked shoulders. "Please, Grayson, take me out of this room." He didn't let me walk. I don't think my legs would have held me anyway. Grayson scooped me up into his arms, pulling me tight against his bare, blood-streaked chest. I flinched at the contact, my skin raw and hypersensitive. But he just held me tighter, burying his face in my hair, inhaling deeply as if trying to scrub the scent of death and jasmine from the nostrils. "I've got you," he chanted, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I've got you, Zuri. You're safe." He carried me out of that red-lit metal tomb, past the servers that were still humming, past Martha, who was beginning to groan on the floor, and past the cooling, mutilated corpse of the woman who had tried to erase me. I squeezed my eyes shut as we passed Clara. I didn't want to see her again. I didn't want to see what we had done to her. The corridor outside was chaos. The few guards we had were running back and forth, securing the lower levels. Cole was there, his arm hastily bandaged, barking orders. When he saw Grayson naked, covered in gore, carrying me like a broken doll, he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went to the bruises already darkening on my throat, then to Grayson's face. The question died on his lips. He just nodded, a sharp, respectful jerk of his head, and stepped aside. They knew. The king had returned and the usurper was dead. Grayson didn't stop. He carried me up the emergency stairs, kicking open doors with unnecessary force up through the levels of the silent house until we reached our master's suite. He kicked the door shut behind us, sealing us inside the massive, opulent room that still felt so foreign to me. But tonight, it smelled faintly of us, of lavender detergent and Grayson's underlying scent of pine and musk. It smelled safe. He walked straight to the massive bed, laying me down on the Egyptian cotton sheets with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man who had just ripped a throat out with his teeth. My body was starting to betray me. The adrenaline crash hit hard. My limbs felt like lead, yet they wouldn't stop shaking. My teeth chattered violently. Grayson moved away for a second, and panic flared in my chest. I made a pathetic, reaching sound. "I'm here. I'm just getting water," he soothed, returning instantly with a wet face cloth from the ensuite bathroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, disregarding the blood and filth he was smearing onto the expensive duvet. He reached out, his large hand hovering, trembling slightly before cupping the side of my face. "Let me see," he whispered. I tilted my chin up, wincing at the movement. The muscles in my neck felt torn. Grayson hissed when he saw the full extent of the damage. His golden eyes burned, The pupils slitted. A low growl started in his chest, directed not at me, but at the memory of her hands on me. She should have died slower, he grated out, the beast very close to the surface. Grayson, stop, I whispered, the words hurting my throat. She's gone. It's over. The rage bled out of him, replaced by a crushing wave of guilt that hit me through the bond. His shoulders slumped. I let her get to you. I abandoned my post. You were protecting the generators. You were protecting the pack. You are my pack, he said fiercely, leaning over me. Nothing else matters if you aren't breathing, Zuri. Nothing. He began to clean me. With agonizing tenderness, he used the cool cloth to wipe the sweat and dust from my face. He dabbed gently around the purple marks on my neck. He found a cut on my hairline I hadn't even noticed, and cleaned that too. He was meticulous, treating me like fine porcelain that had been cracked. When he was done, he tossed the ruined cloth onto the floor. He didn't move to get up. He just looked at me, his golden eyes searching mine, needing confirmation that I was really there. I put the knife in her heart, I said again. I needed him to understand. The village girl was gone. I killed her before you got there. I know, he murmured, his thumb tracing my jawline. I felt her fear through the bond right before you struck. You terrified an Alpha Zuri. You didn't just survive her, you beat her. There was pride in his voice, thick and heavy, but it was underlined by a profound sadness that I had been forced to do it at all. Is it really over? I asked. My voice was small, the shaking returning. Are they gone? Grayson nodded slowly. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. He smelled of blood and sweat, but underneath it all, he smelled like home. Clara is dead. Her mercenaries have fled. The war is over, my love. No one is coming for us. The reality of it finally broke through the shock. The tension that had been my constant companion since the day I met him in the long grass began to unspool. A sob tore out of my bruised throat, then another. Grayson shifted instantly. He pulled back the duvet and climbed into the bed next to me, not caring that he was filthy, pulling my shaking body against his solid warmth. He wrapped his arms around me, creating a cocoon where nothing could hurt me. I buried my face in his neck and cried, ugly, wrenching tears of relief, horror, and exhaustion. I cried for the girl I used to be, and for the woman I had just killed. Grayson just held me. He stroked my hair, murmuring soft reassurances in his language and mine, letting me bleed the trauma out in tears onto his chest. We lay there in the dark, tangled together, two survivors on the shore of a new, terrifyingly quiet world. I woke up because the silence was too loud. For days, my life had been noise, roars, gunfire, alarms, my own screaming heartbeat. Now, the massive bedroom was tomb silent, save for the soft rhythm of Grayson's breathing beside me. I lay still, cataloging the damage. Every muscle in my body felt like it had been tenderized with a mallet. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache where I'd hit the junction box. But the worst was my throat. It felt stiff, swollen internally. Swallowing dry air was a chore that sent sharp little needles of pain radiating toward my ears. I shifted slightly, and the scent of dried copper and old sweat puffed up from the sheets. We had fallen asleep covered in the filth of the bunker. I'm awake. Grayson's voice was a low rumble, instantaneous. He hadn't been sleeping deeply. I rolled carefully onto my side to face him. He was propped up on one elbow, watching me. His golden eyes were clear of the red haze of the beast, but they were shadowed with heavy exhaustion and lingering guilt. He reached out, his knuckles grazing my cheek, his touch feather light. How do you feel? Like I fell out of a baobab tree and hit every branch on the way down, I rasped. My voice sounded hideous, wrecked and gravelly. His jaw tightened at the sound. His eyes dropped to my neck. I didn't need a mirror to know it looked bad. I could feel the heat radiating from the bruised skin. "We need to get clean," he said, his voice thick. "I need to get her scent off of you." The mention of her brought it all rushing back. The red lights, the jasmine perfume, the feeling of the knife sliding into meat. I shuddered violently. "Yes, please." He didn't let me get up on my own. He swung his legs out of bed and came around to my side, lifting me as if my weight was nothing. I was too tired and sore to protest his coddling. He carried me into the palatial ensuite bathroom. It was all white marble and chrome, blindingly bright under the recessed lighting. He set me down gently on the closed toilet seat and turned to the massive walk-in shower, twisting the knobs to get the steam going. While the water warmed, he turned back to me. He hesitated, then slowly reached out and peeled the ruined, blood-stiffened tactical shirt over my head. I hissed as the fabric tugged at my neck. "Sorry," he murmured, his eyes pained. "I'm sorry, Zuri." He stripped me efficiently, his movements clinical yet deeply intimate. When I was naked, he undressed himself, kicking his filthy jeans into a corner. He led me into the steam. The hot water hit my skin like a shock, stinging the cuts on my face and arms, but it felt glorious. Grayson didn't try to make it sexual. He grabbed a bar of soap and a soft sponge and began to wash me. He started at my shoulders, working his way down my arms, scrubbing away the dried blood that wasn't mine. He was methodical, almost ritualistic about it. He turned me around gently to wash my back. I leaned my forehead against the cool tiles, closing my eyes as his large, warm hands worked the soap into my skin, kneading the knots in my muscles. He washed my hair 3 times. I think he was trying to scrub the memory of the bunker out of my scalp. When the water running off me was finally clear, he pulled me back against his chest, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin carefully on the top of my wet head. We just stood there under the spray for a long time, letting the heat soak into our bones. The bond hummed between us, a quiet, steady vibration of mutual relief and shared survival. We were alive. We were together. Eventually, he turned off the water. He dried me with a plush towel, patting the skin around my neck with agonizing care. He wrapped my hair in a turban and led me back into the bedroom. He found one of his oversized t-shirts, soft, worn cotton that smelled only of him, and pulled it over my head. It fell to my mid-thighs. I sat on the edge of the fresh bed the house staff must have remade while we slept. I felt raw, scrubbed clean, but emotionally exposed. Grayson pulled on sleep pants and paced the room once, running a hand through his damp hair. The energy was starting to build in him again, the need to manage, to control. "Martha?" I asked, my voice still a painful croak. He stopped pacing. "She has a concussion and needed 12 stitches, but she's awake. Cole is with her. She's furious she missed the end of the fight." A small, weak smile tugged at my lips. That sounded like Martha. "And the others? The mercenaries?" Gone. The moment Clara's heart stopped, their contract was void. They scrambled. Lucien and Elias swept the perimeter at dawn. "We are clear, Zuri. It's truly over." He came and knelt between my knees, his hands resting on my thighs. He looked up at me, his expression intense. "You saved this pack last night," he said fiercely. "You saved me. If you hadn't triggered that protocol, if you hadn't fought back—" "I killed her, Grayson," I whispered, the reality settling heavily on my chest. "I didn't just fight back. I ended her life. Even when we hunted at home, I never enjoyed the kill. It was just necessary." "And this was necessary," he insisted, his thumbs rubbing circles on my legs through the cotton shirt. "She came here to erase us, to erase you. You are the Luna of this pack, Zuri. Protecting the territory, protecting yourself, that is your right. It is your duty." The Luna. The words felt strange, heavy, but they didn't feel wrong anymore. The girl who had run from the lion in the long grass was dead. She had died in that red-lit room with Clara's hands around her throat. I looked down at Grayson, at the fierce pride and overwhelming love in his golden eyes. I reached out and touched his damp hair. "I'm still here," I said softly, more to myself than to him. He leaned his cheek against my palm, closing his eyes, breathing me in. "Yes, you are. And you are never leaving my side again." 3 months ago, this dining hall had been a cold, echoing cavern of chrome and glass where I felt like an exotic pet trying to learn parlor tricks. Now it smelled of paprika, slow-roasted lamb, and the earthy scent of dozens of wolves. It smelled like home. "Martha, the shipment of winter gear from the northern depot is late again," I said, tapping the tablet in front of me without looking up. I didn't need to look up to know she was hovering at my elbow, ready with an answer. "Already on the line with the supplier, Luna," Martha replied, her voice crisp. The bandage on her forehead was long gone, replaced by a faint silver scar that she wore with pride. "I've told them if they miss another deadline, Alpha Grayson will be handling the renegotiation personally." "Good. And double the order for the medical supplies. We have 3 new pregnant females arriving from the Scottish border next week. I want the infirmary fully stocked." I finally looked up, meeting Martha's eyes. The severe woman who had once looked at me as an inconvenient liability now gave me a curt nod of absolute respect. "Consider it done, Luna Zuri." She took the tablet from me and marched off toward the kitchens, barking orders at 2 young wolves who scrambled out of her way. I leaned back in the heavy oak chair at the head of the massive table, Grayson's table. The estate, once a sterile fortress against the world, had transformed. It was still a fortress, its security systems state-of-the-art, but now it was alive. Grayson had formally reclaimed his title a month ago. The Wormwood Pack, long thought scattered and broken by Clara's treachery, had heard the call of their true alpha. They had come out of hiding, out of fear, drawn by the news that the usurper was dead and the king had returned, with a queen who carried steel in her spine. I ran a hand over the smooth wood of the table, catching my reflection in a silver water pitcher. The woman staring back at me was still Zuri from the village, but polished. My hair was neatly braided and pulled back from my face, emphasizing the faint scars that still lined my neck, my badge of office. I wore dark trousers and a fitted sweater made of wool soft enough to make Elizabeth back home weep with envy. I wasn't just wearing the clothes, I was filling the role. The fear that used to be my constant shadow had been replaced by a bone-deep awareness of the dozens of lives depending on me. "Luna." I turned to see Elias standing by my chair. The hulking young wolf, who had once sneered about my baggage, now kept his eyes respectfully lowered until I acknowledged him. "Report, Elias." "Perimeter patrol is clear. Cole picked up a scent near the southern boundary. Human hikers, likely lost." He escorted them back to the main road and verified they left the area. No threats. "Excellent. Tell Cole to rotate his squad out for dinner. They've earned the hot meal." Elias thumped his fist over his heart, a traditional gesture I was still getting used to, and hurried off. I stood up, rolling my shoulders. The sheer volume of logistics required to run a pack of 60 people was staggering. Grayson handled the strategy, the alliances, and the enforcement. I handled the internal mechanics, the food, the housing, the disputes, the integration of new members. It was hard work, harder than hauling water from the river back home, but it was satisfying. I was building something here. I walked through the halls, the hushed silence replaced by the hum of activity. Doors were open, people were laughing. I passed the communal living area where a group of younger wolves were draped over furniture, watching a massive television. They sat up straighter when I passed, murmurs of Luna following in my wake. I hadn't demanded this respect. I hadn't postured or threatened. I had simply killed the thing that terrified them, and then I had gone to work making sure they had warm beds and full bellies. In my village, that was what leadership meant. It seemed it worked here too. I found myself drawn to the massive French doors leading out to the stone terrace overlooking the sprawling back lawn of the estate. The sun was setting, painting the damp English sky in bruise-like shades of purple and orange. The mate bond thrummed low in my chest, a warm, constant vibration that let me know exactly where he was. Grayson was coming up the long driveway in the black SUV, returning from a meeting in London with the merchant Alphas. He was cementing the alliances I had helped forge that first terrifying night at the skyscraper. I stepped out onto the terrace just as the car pulled up below. Grayson climbed out before the engine even cut off. He was wearing a tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but his tie was already loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. He looked up, sensing me instantly. His golden eyes, clear and bright, locked onto mine. The sheer weight of his presence, the power that rolled off him in waves, still took my breath away sometimes. He was a king in his domain. He didn't bother with the stairs. He vaulted the stone balustrade of the terrace, landing silently in front of me. The intensity of his gaze softened the moment he was close enough to touch me. He reached out, his large hand cupping my neck, his thumb brushing lightly over the scars there. It was a possessive gesture, but also one of profound reassurance. "My Zuri," he murmured, his voice rough with the day's weariness. He leaned down, inhaling my scent deeply before kissing me. The kiss wasn't frantic or desperate like they had been in the bunker. It was slow, deep, and settled. It was the kiss of a husband coming home to his wife, the kiss of an alpha greeting his equal. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "Tell me the pact didn't burn down while I was gone." I chuckled, leaning into his solidity. Martha frightened a supplier into compliance, and I believe Elias is finally understanding the concept of a chore chart. We are thriving, Grayson. He smiled, a true, relaxed smile that reached his eyes, something I hadn't seen at all in those first few days. "They respect you," he said quietly, looking over my shoulder into the brightly lit house where his people were safe. "More than that, they adore you. You've made this place a home, Zuri. You did something I never could have done with just claws and teeth." "I just used what I knew," I replied, placing my hand over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath the suit jacket. A village is stronger when everyone eats from the same pot. Grayson covered my hand with his own. "Come, let's go inside. My wolf is starving, and he wants to sit at the head of the table next to his mate. Time =, 0.6s. The English soil was heavy, clinging stubbornly to my gloves, so different from the dry, red dust of home. But the smell, I had managed to get the smell right. I sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist, surveying my work. It had taken months of arguing with landscape architects and importing soil enrichments, but this corner of the vast Wormwood estate was mine. I had planted heat-loving herbs in raised beds that trapped the sun, surrounded by hardy, drought-resistant shrubs that mimicked the scrubland I grew up in. It wasn't perfect. The air was too damp, the sky too often gray. But when I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of rosemary and thyme baking in the rare afternoon sun, I could almost hear the goats bleating back in the village. The bond stirred before I heard his footsteps. It was a warm, golden thrum in my chest, a constant sense of rightness. "Martha said I'd find you kneeling in the dirt." Grayson's voice came from behind me, amused and gentle. I didn't turn immediately. I plunged my trowel into the earth one last time. Martha thinks it's unseemly for a Luna to have dirt under her fingernails. She prefers me in the war room with a stylus. Time =, 0.6 seed. Grayson chuckled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground I knelt on. He stepped around me, dropping to one knee so we were eye level. He was in his Alpha uniform, dark jeans and a t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest, having just come from training with the new recruits. He reached out, pulling one of my dirty gloves off and taking my bare hand in his larger, calloused one. He brought my knuckles to his lips. "Martha forgets that you were forged in dirt and sun. It suits you." His golden eyes searched mine, his smile fading slightly into a look of intense focus. "You smell different today, Zuri. Not just the herbs, something else, something deeper." My breath hitched. I had known for 3 days. I hadn't needed a test. The changes in my body were subtle but undeniable to senses heightened by the bond. The sudden aversion to coffee, the strange, fierce hunger that woke me at dawn, the way my center of gravity felt infinitesimally shifted. I placed my free, gloved hand over my flat stomach. The vibration of the bond between us spiked, suddenly wild and electric. Grayson froze. His eyes widened, the pupils dilating until the gold was almost swallowed by black. His gaze dropped to my hand on my belly, then snapped back to my face. The air around him crackled with sudden, immense power. "Zuri," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Are you—" I nodded, tears pricking my eyes, not from sadness but from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the moment. "We're going to need a nursery, Grayson. A secure one." The sound he made wasn't human. It was a low, guttural roar of pure, unadulterated joy that tore from his chest. He didn't care about the dirt. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my neck, inhaling sharply right over my scent gland. "A pup," he murmured into my skin, his body trembling against mine. "My God, Zuri, a pup." He pulled back just enough to cut my face, his thumbs wiping away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. The fierce Alpha, the king who had ripped throats out to claim his throne, looked at me with an awe so profound it made my knees weak. "You have given me everything," he whispered fiercely. "A home, a pack, and now a future. I will burn the world down before I let anything touch either of you." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." I laughed softly, resting my forehead against his. "But Grayson, I need to call home. I need to tell them." An hour later, we were in his study. I sat behind the massive desk, Grayson standing behind my chair like a sentinel, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The connection was grainy at first, then settled into a clear image of my parents' small hut. My mother's face filled the screen, beaming. "Zuri, my girl." Behind her, my father sat in his usual wooden chair, his face stern but his eyes crinkling with restrained pleasure at seeing me. My brother, now 7, and missing even more teeth, squeezed into the frame, waving frantically. Sister, did you see the lion yet in England?" he yelled. I laughed, the sound thick in my throat. "No lions here, just big dogs." We spent 10 minutes catching up. I asked about Elizabeth and her son, about the goat herd's new kids, about the dry season. It was grounding to hear the familiar rhythms of village life, a world away from high-tech security systems and pack politics. Eventually, a lull fell over the conversation. My mother was looking at me closely, that maternal sixth sense crossing continents. "Zuri," she said softly, "your eyes are shining. What is it?" I reached up and covered Grayson's hand on my shoulder with mine. I took a deep breath. "Mama, Papa, I have news. Good news." I looked directly into the camera. "I am pregnant." My mother let out a high-pitched ululation of pure joy, clapping her hands together. "A grandchild! Thomas, did you hear? A baby!" My brother started cheering, though I doubt he fully understood. But my father didn't smile. His thick brows drew together in a deep, troubled furrow. The silence from his end of the line was heavy. "Already?" The single word was heavy with judgment. It was the voice of the village elder. The traditional father who still worried his daughter had been swept away too fast by a powerful, dangerous stranger. My mother stopped cheering, hitting his arm lightly. "Thomas!" My father held up a hand to silence her. He looked at me through the screen, his dark eyes intense. He looked at the expensive clothes I wore, the grand room behind me, and the large hand of the man standing over me. "You have only just settled, Zuri," he said in his voice gruff. Are you safe? Is this too soon?" "Papa," I said firmly, sitting up straighter. The Luna voice, the one I used to command 60 wolves, slipped into my tone. "I am safe. I am loved. This is not too soon. This is exactly the right time. We are building our family." My father held my gaze for a long, tense moment. He seemed to be weighing the girl I had been against the woman I had become. Slowly the tension drained from his shoulders. The deep frown smoothed out, replaced by a weary but accepting calm. He nodded slowly. "A family," he repeated. He let out a long sigh, then shifted in his chair. "It is good news, Zuri. A blessing." He cleared his throat, his expression shifting again, becoming formal. "The man, your husband." He didn't look at Grayson, but looked at me. "I wish to speak words with him. Alone." My heart thumped. This was the elder demanding audience with the Alpha. The two worlds colliding. I looked up at Grayson. His expression was unreadable, but the bond remained calm, respectful. "Of course," I murmured. I stood up. "Here, Grayson." Grayson moved around the desk. He didn't sit. He stood before the camera, towering even on the screen, but he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect to the older man. "Thomas," Grayson said, his voice deep and serious. I walked to the door of the study. Before I slipped out, I heard my father's voice, strong and demanding, come through the speakers. "Listen to me, Grayson. You hold my heart in your lands, and now you hold another piece of it. You listen well." I closed the door softly, leaving the two most important men in my life to forge their own understanding. I walked down the hall, my hand on my stomach, smiling as I felt the future taking root. 3 years later, the autumn wind whipped around the stone terrace, carrying the scent of rain and wet leaves, but it couldn't cut through the warmth of the two small bodies pressed against my legs. I stood at the balustrade, looking out over the sprawling grounds of the Wormwood estate. The gardens were lush, the perimeter fences secure, and smoke curled from the chimneys of the pack housing in the valley below. We were thriving. "Mama, look!" Elias, named for the guard who had once insulted me and now would die for my children, tugged on my pant leg. He was 3 years old, with his father's dark hair and my dark eyes. He was pointing excitedly at a squirrel daring to run across the lawn. A low, surprisingly deep growl rumbled in his little chest. His eyes flashed, for just a second, a brilliant, startling gold. Beside him, his twin sister, Clara, a name I had chosen to reclaim it from darkness, to fill it with light, giggled. She had Grayson's eyes, always gold, and a wild tangle of curls. She dropped to all fours, mimicking her brother, letting out a high-pitched yip. "Careful, little wolves," a deep voice murmured behind us. Grayson stepped out onto the terrace, wrapping his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He smelled of power, pine, and contented husband. The twins immediately abandoned their squirrel hunt and tackled his legs. He laughed, a free, joyful sound, bending down to scoop them both up effortlessly, one in each arm. They wriggled and growled playfully, teething on his shoulders. "They're shifting early," I noted, leaning my head against his arm, watching our children. These beautiful wild bridges between our worlds. "Like their father," Grayson said smugly, kissing Clara on the forehead before setting them back down. "Run along. Don't cross the scent line near the woods." They didn't need telling twice. They took off like shots, tumbling over each other across the vast green lawn, a blur of energy and emerging instinct. Grayson pulled me tighter against his chest. We stood in silence, watching the next generation of the Wormwood Pack play. I thought about the girl who had run through the long grass in Africa, terrified of the beast that was now holding me with such tenderness. I had lost my innocence. I had killed to survive, and I had crossed oceans and cultures. I had forged myself into iron to match his will, and in doing so, I had found a love stronger than silver. Grayson pressed a kiss to my temple, his golden eyes scanning his domain, resting finally on his children. "We did it, Zuri," he whispered, the words carried away by the wind. "The dynasty is secure."
I don't need the sun to shine for me if I wake up and you're still here. I don't need the world to notice. Your smile already knows my fears. I've walked roads that promised heaven, but they left my hands empty too. Every prayer I never finished somehow led my heart to you. Let the days be slow and heavy, let the nights be cold sometimes. If your breath is close beside me, I will never lose my mind. They can keep their golden power, let them chase what they pursue. I have found my quiet answer in the simple truth of you. As long as it's you, I'm okay. As long as your heart stays near, I don't need much in this life. Just you, just now, just here. As long as it's you, I'm strong, even when the road is hard. If I have your hand in mine, I already have my part. Let tomorrow come softly. We don't need to rush the truth. If this life gives me nothing else, it gives